This story of mine comes from perhaps the worst period of my entire life so far. I grew up privileged. Summers in the Hamptons and winters in the Bahamas kind of privileged. My dad was an investment banker, and a good one at that. So much so that Mom never had to work after they got married. I had it all. Fancy private schooling bled into what I thought would be a free college education. Well, not exactly free since Dad was footing the bill, but I'd never be saddled with any kind of crippling student debt that would turn my peers into wage slaves for the rest of their lives. At least, that's what I thought was going to happen, until the 2008 financial crash. A lot of other financial companies got government bailouts, right out of the taxpayer's pocket, but my dad's didn't. For whatever reason, they didn't qualify, so he lost his job. Long story short, one day I was in college, living the good life. The next I was on the phone to my mom, being told I'd have to drop out and find a job if I ever wanted to be able to support myself, as they just didn't have the spare cash anymore. It was devastating. I'd never worked a day in my life before, and there I was, traipsing around town with a folder full of resumes, trying to find something, anything, to get some cash in my account. And that's how I ended up working at Burger King. It was really hard at first. Although I didn't necessarily feel like it, I obviously gave off some major rich girl vibes, as the rough, tough, working-class staff members detected it immediately. They didn't go easy on me, not in the slightest. But if I'm honest, that's the best thing that could have happened to me. In the space of about 3 months, I learned the meaning of a hard day's work, and the more I threw myself into the challenge of full-time work, the more my colleagues started to respect and appreciate me. In the end, we were incredibly tight, and I still keep in touch with a few of them via Facebook and stuff, but anyway, now that you have a bit of background, on with the story. So I was working the late shift one night, which is generally the hardest shift of the day. The manager only ever put the most competent, most capable workers on that shift, and I know it sounds dumb, but the fact that I'd proven myself enough to be put on that cycle was a huge compliment to me. We used to stay open until midnight on weekends, and at about 11:30, we get this pretty regular-looking dude coming in, standing there at the counter whilst perusing the menu behind me. I gave it my best. "May I take your order, sir?" He looks down at me. Without skipping a beat, he's like, "2 double cheeseburgers, please." I could have plugged the order into the register when he interrupts me with an addendum into his order. "Could I have those without the bun, the bacon, or any cheese, and hold off on grilling them for me, would you? Thanks." I stopped plugging his order in and looked up at him. "Excuse me?" It took a moment for me to really process what he was asking for, and he smiled as he began to clarify what his order was. "Is there a problem?" Yeah. I'm not sure we're allowed to serve raw hamburgers. It's against food safety regulations." "You've heard of steak tartare, haven't you?" Yet another guy who immediately detected something in my mannerisms or accent that suggested I was upper class. I didn't even justify it with a response. I just asked him to wait a second while I talked to my supervisor. So the supervisor comes out and basically tells the guy no, just like I had. Even if you can eat raw beef, it's just not something we're able to serve our customers, or that's what I thought anyway. Because as my super is talking to this guy, calmly explaining that as much as he's sorry, it's just not something we can do, the guy rolls his eyes and pulls out a wad of high-denomination bills from his pocket and is just like, "How much would it take?" Now the place is pretty much empty at this point, but all eyes are on this guy and his wad of bills. I'll never forget the moment my supervisor stopped talking all calm and professional before turning to me and telling me, "Go to the back and clean something." I was stunned. I knew the guy well enough to know exactly what he was doing. He was going to clear the floor of potential witnesses, then actually get this guy's order. I pretended to clean something, all the while spying on him as he collected 2 raw patties from the fridge and sort of went through the motions of cooking them, so that if anyone watched the cameras back, it would look like he had done his job to the letter. A couple of minutes later, he comes into the back, telling me to take over the register, but not before he slides a few crisp $100 bills into my hand, telling me not to say a word to anyone and to just forget about what had happened before people start running their mouths about it. As far as the rest of the team knew, he had told the guy no, served him some regular burgers, then simply gone about the rest of his shift as normal. But I couldn't let it go. I had to get some closure, even if I had a few $100 worth of tips. I had to know what this guy's deal was. So being the sly fox that I am, I ducked my supervisor and hit up the manager in his office, asking him if, since it's so quiet, it'd be okay if I took a cigarette break. He looks at me all confused, turning in his chair before saying, "You don't smoke, do you?" Yeah, I just started. Stresses of the job." "Well, I'm sorry to hear that, but you're entitled to your 5 minutes. Just make sure you get your station covered." So I did. I got a buddy of mine to man the register, bummed a smoke off of one of the fryer guys, then stood out back trying to get a look at the guy as he headed for his car. So there's me, standing there, pretending to smoke while I pretend I'm not watching this dude climbing into his driver's side. Then the thought hits me. It's late. Stores might not be open. In fact, they definitely weren't open, and the dude probably wanted something to cook with, right? Wrong. I distinctly see him unwrap the dripping wet burger wrapper before he raised the raw meat to his face. He doesn't take a bite, not like I expected him to. In fact, it looks more like he's smelling the meat more than anything else. I really couldn't believe what I was seeing. Literally, though, I thought the perspective had me seeing something that I wasn't, so I made the awful decision to edge a little closer to the car, angling out so I could see through the driver's side window. All without considering that his side mirror would reveal me as the peeper that I was. And oh my God, the way he looked at me through that window, this wild look in his eyes after breaking from what looked so much like he was making out with that chunk of meat. He was furious, gunning his engine before ripping out of the parking lot as fast as he could move. I just tossed the cigarette, ran back inside, and went straight to the super to tell him what I'd seen. He only repeated that no matter what, I wasn't to tell a soul that we'd served him raw meat, or those few $100 bills would be the last money we ever got out of this place if the owner didn't opt to sue us too. We never saw that guy ever again, and no one ever found out about the raw meat we sold him. I don't suppose I was in any real danger, but it was definitely the scariest, if not the most disturbing incident I've ever had while working at Burger King. So a few days after my 19th birthday, a few of my buddies and I are rolling around town in one of our cars, passing bottles and generally getting up to no good. We find a spot to park up, have a few smokes and blast some music, hanging out and just messing around until long after the sunset. Eventually, once we get hungry enough, we decided to drive over to Burger King to get a bite to eat. Now, I'm pretty lit by that point, and I've been lying if I said I wasn't generally being a complete jerk here, but here goes. So the Burger King drive-thru is closed for some reason, so we park the car up, get out, and head into the restaurant. And at the head of this huge line was this giant ham beast who was in the middle of waving her arm flab around, making some animated complaint about her order. My drunk buddies and I proceeded to watch this ham beast making an absolute idiot out of herself for like 10 minutes straight, holding up the entire line until eventually she steps to the side to wait for her corrected order or whatever. Either way, the line starts to move again. Everyone is super livid at this hog lady for holding up the line, and I could tell the workers behind the counter were less than pleased with her too. So by the time I get to the front to give my order, I'm feeling all cocky and righteous, and for some reason I had it in my head that if I made the workers laugh by roasting the hog lady, I'd get like a free meal out of it or something. So I say something to the effect of, "May I apologize on behalf of humanity for the irate snuffling of my heavy friend here." No one laughs. They all just look pretty shocked. looking back and forth between the ham beast and myself, waiting for the aftermath. She turns red in the face, and I expect her to explode on me. I'm ready for the black eye or whatever. It was worth it, just to hear my buddies cracking up behind me. But she didn't flip her lid. She didn't say a word. She just sort of stood there, steaming mad until the guy behind the counter appeared with her amended food order. Then she just sits down and starts eating her food. We get our food and sit down on the opposite side of the restaurant, and all the while my buddies are like, "Come on, man, you burned her, jeez, dude." But I'm looking over at her, because the ham beast is on her phone, just talking all quiet, but every so often she shoots us a little bit of a look with this big smug grin on her fat face. I don't know what I was expecting to happen, but why I thought I'd get away with it, I have no idea. Because the moment we walked out of that restaurant, we just hear from behind us, "There he is. That one, right there." I look around, and she's pointing at me, the same smug grin on her face. Then, when I turn back, there's a gun in my face. I honestly can't remember what the dude was screaming at me, only that he was, but I know it was her husband. It's weird the little details you notice when something like that happens to you. I distinctly remember seeing the dude's wedding ring on a finger that was wrapped around the handle of the pistol. I'm not a gun guy, but that thing was an incredibly big pistol, like huge. And all I did was sort of zone out and look down the barrel for a few moments with this guy's screams ringing in my ears. It was only when he pushed it to my forehead that reality came back to me and hit me like a ton of bricks. I just remember shaking so hard that when the guy told me to get down on my knees, I could barely react. He screamed at me to get on my knees because I didn't deserve to die on my feet, and that line stuck with me even to this day. I've never been so scared in my entire life. If you notice, I haven't given my name or where this happened or when it happened. This is to give me enough anonymity to admit that just after I fell to my knees, and I mean fell to my knees, I just straight urinated my pants, which I didn't even know was really a thing. I mean, obviously I've heard about people being so scared they wet themselves, but I didn't think it could actually happen to people. But I suppose since I was full of booze and that large Coke, there was plenty in my bladder to void. And void my bladder I did. Somehow, I had found a way to make a terrible situation even worse. Not only did I think I was about to die in a parking lot, while a whole restaurant full of strangers looked on in horror, I was about to die soaked in my own urine, cowering and shaking, on my knees outside of a freaking Burger King. He starts shouting other stuff at this point too, but I can't quite remember that either. I was just waiting for the moment my light switched off, a feeling like I'd fallen asleep real fast that I'd never, ever wake up from. I remember trying to shout something myself, something about how, "Will someone please call the cops?" or whatever, but fear is a powerful thing. I couldn't speak. I mean, it was like a nightmare come to life. One of those where you try to scream for help, but your voice just sort of dries up in your throat. The next thing I remember are my ears pricking up to the word cops being spoken by some bystander just out of my view. Then I hear the distinct voice of the ham beast repeating the word, only this time, it's not me that sounds scared, it's her. I feel the tip of the pistol leave the back of my head, and by the time I summon the courage to look around again, I see the pair of them, ham beast and gun guy, screeching out of the parking lot in some battered old sedan, followed swiftly by the blaring sirens in the distance. It was only when I was giving my statement to the cops that I noticed my buddies were gone, and not only were they completely out of sight, so was the car. So I had to be driven home to my parents' house in a freaking cop car, which clued them into the fact that I had been drinking, which to them was far more worthy of their attention to the fact I'd almost just been shot in the Burger King parking lot. They tried to ground me for like a month, but they didn't need to enforce it. I was too shaken up to leave the house for the first week entirely. Just be careful who you're talking to or trying to be funny. You never know who's psycho enough to put a gun to your head.
I live 5 minutes away from 2 Burger Kings. When I worked cleaning cars on my own, I would walk on over to the larger one because they had a better card reader. I can't tell you how many times I couldn't pay for my food because the other Burger King's card reader would not accept my debit card. So, just to play it safe, I always went to the one I dubbed the Good Burger King. Anyway, I walked on over at the end of my short workday, enjoying some podcasts through my headphones. It should be noted that even though this fast food joint was right on the shoulder of the main road through town, I literally never saw anyone else in there save for me and the employees. I guess it was bad timing. On the day in question, I ordered my usual bacon-filled meal and took a seat in the back corner. It was my favorite spot because the employees and anyone that might walk in couldn't really notice me. Whenever I go out to eat, I really don't like to be bothered. Now this is when someone else actually walks in. Right off the bat, this is curious, because I've never seen anyone else walk in here while I was there. He was a tall, way too thin white guy who, to be honest, looked like he just finished shooting up. He was very pale, sweaty, and agitated. I watched the guy from my spot very cautiously. He goes up to the counter with his left hand hovering over his lower back, and he's shaking like crazy. As I look closer, I realize this guy has something hidden under his shirt. And that's when a feeling of danger comes over me. This guy was so sketchy to begin with, but now he had something to hide. The cashier asked what he would like, and I kid you not, this guy gropes the thing that's under his shirt and starts shaking more. Then I can hear him stutter like he can't figure out what to say. After a few seconds of watching the poor cashier being creeped out, the guy slams his right hand on the counter and just says, "Give me a number 2. His hand stops shaking and he finally lets go of the thing under his shirt. He stands there, arms crossed and shaking his head constantly, waiting for his food to come out. And when it does, he yanks the food from the employee's hands and walks away. I hear the employee get mad and cuss at him, but the guy just takes his tray and walks away. His eyes are closed and he's shaking his head no for some reason. He walks right toward me. I start to get a bit nervous, kind of ducking down in a desperate attempt to not be seen by this weird guy. But his eyes are still closed and he turns left, somehow managing to sit across the way without ever opening his eyes. He sits there, kind of angled away from me. And when he sits down, his back arches forward and his shirt arches up, so I get a good look at whatever he's hiding under his shirt. It was a black handgun. Now in any other situation, I would be okay with this. Where I live, plenty of people have concealed carry permits. If you were looking, you could probably spot a few people with their concealed carries here and there. I'm not sure if that means they aren't concealed enough or what, but in this case, this guy was a problem from the start. He seemed very combative when he ordered, like he was looking for any reason to complain or have a problem with the people behind the counter. Not to mention he looked freaking drugged out of his mind, shaking all over. But what freaked me out the most was how he was grabbing at the gun when he was at the counter. He had his hand on it from the start like he was planning something. I guess he changed his mind. Thank God. Freaked out, I could not help but continue to watch this guy. I mean, I didn't feel safe. For all I knew, he could pull that gun out any second and start blasting people away. From my perspective, I could see the side of his face just barely. And after a few moments of not being able to eat my food, I saw the guy's shoulder kind of jutting up and down. I looked closer, and it looked like the guy was crying. He wasn't touching his food at all, he even brought his hands up and covered his face. That was it. At that point, I decided it was time to go. I picked up my stuff, dumped my leftovers in the trash, and headed for the exit. But before I walked out, I looked toward the guy one last time. He was still sitting there, but now he was staring right freaking at me, eyes all red and puffy and watery. Immediately, I looked away, walked out, and I never went back there. Sadly, for all my future Burger King ventures, I would be going to the so-called bad Burger King. I don't know what was wrong with that guy, but if he had a change of heart about what he was planning to do with that gun, I'm glad. I just hope I never see him again. I live in Calgary, Canada, in a little apartment. Like most people, I enjoy going out and chilling with my friends. Usually we talk, see a movie, go out to eat, just have fun. But this night was far from what I expected. My friend had a hankering for Burger King at the moment, so we decided to head on over. The experience occurred recently, and of course, all of this creepy clown business was going on, so we had our guards up. To be safe, we went to the closest one we could find. We made it there pretty quick, without a hassle. We ordered our food and sat down. The table we chose was close to the window towards the back edge. While we were eating, just out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. Being at Burger King, I didn't think any more than it just being another patron coming inside to enjoy a meal like we were. But as instinct would have it, without a thought, I looked towards the movement. And that's when I saw something very worrisome. Outside stood a figure that was all black, or was wearing a black sweater. Whatever it was, they were hard to see at night. They stared at me, or were at least facing my exact position. I then turned toward my friend to see if he was looking at the figure as well, but he was staring down at his phone while munching on fries. So I turned back quickly to watch this strange person, only to see that they were gone. I was seriously spooked. I was very creeped out. This wasn't something I could just shake off. Someone was there 1 second, and then they were gone the next, gone like they were never there in the first place. Was I just seeing things in the dark outside? I tried my best to finish eating. As I was just finishing up my meal, I went to the bathroom to clean my hands. I always do this after eating, because I hate the feeling of sticky or dirty hands. I turned off the faucet and go to the paper towel dispenser to dry myself off when my vision starts to blur. Then everything goes black. When I came to, I'm standing at the entrance to the bathroom, facing the restaurant lobby. Except now all the lights were off. The place looked closed. Everyone was gone, even my friend that I had come with. All of the cars in the parking lot were gone as well. Why did he leave me? Did nobody check the bathroom? I started to panic. I started to laugh nervously, which was odd because I was never the type to make nervous laughter. It took me a few moments to see that the figure from earlier was now standing in the middle of the lobby. He, or it, was coming right at me. Horrified, I ran back into the bathroom. I know I should have run out of the door, but I wasn't thinking straight. You'll understand why in a few seconds. Back in the bathroom, I was hit by a distinct, disgusting smell. It smelled like something had died and rotted in there. Suddenly, loud banging and scratching erupts from all around me, and at this point, I'm crying. Then the swinging door to the bathroom flies open, and I'm waiting there, petrified, expecting something to come in. But everything goes black again. I woke up on the bathroom floor with my friend over me. He looked worried. He told me I had been passed out for a few minutes, and when I looked around, all the lights were back on. That weird smell was gone, the crazy noises were gone, and as we exited the bathroom, I noticed that everything in the lobby was normal and it was still open. The next day, I went right away to visit the doctor. I was very worried because I had never fainted like that before. I don't know what happened to me the night before, but after that experience, I won't be going back for a while. The doctor told me that it could be caused from blood rushing back to my head too quickly, and I do kind of remember feeling a bit lightheaded a few moments before I blacked out. But still, that does not explain the figure I saw when I was completely aware and awake sitting at that table eating my food. So this isn't exactly my story, but it's my boyfriend's. He works at a Burger King a block or two from our house and has told me of multiple accounts in which weird things have happened. For background info, he works early morning shifts before the sun has a chance to come up, which only makes this account creepier. One time, another worker there thought she saw a little girl at the back of the kitchen. Thinking some kid sneaked behind them, she went to go over and check who it was. But when she got there, she didn't see anyone. The little girl was gone. Since then, there's been multiple times where the cups would fly out at the employees, or things have been knocked down from the shelves. Sometimes the workers' names get called out to them from the very back of the building where the storage closet is. But if they go back to investigate, to see who's calling for them, there's nobody ever there. But the voice always comes in the form of another coworker. A fairly recent one was when my boyfriend was working in the freezer area. He heard the loudest noise, as if metal pipes had fallen. When he went to go check it out, there was nothing on the ground. He couldn't think of anything in the world that could have made that sound, and it spooked him out for the rest of his shift. There's been multiple sightings by different people of a little girl hiding behind the soda aisle in the middle of the dining area, or somebody catches a glimpse of her around the corner. But by far the creepiest thing to happen, in my opinion, is that one of the employees started catching glimpses of a little girl at their own home, as if the entity itself that's been haunting the restaurant has followed him home. That would be terrifying.
This happened during summer when I was 7. I'm an 18-year-old female now. My mother was always working, so I was often left with my grandmother. She would always take me to eat, and after, if I was good, she would take me to the park. I usually got to pick where we ate, so I chose McDonald's. I was sitting down eating my Happy Meal, and my grandma got up to use the bathroom. As soon as she left, a man in his late 20s or early 30s sat down next to me and asked me if I wanted to come play a game. I, being the 7-year-old I was, said yes. He said it was a special game and that I couldn't tell anybody. At this point, my grandma was returning from the bathroom and started yelling at the man to get the hell away from me. He ran out the door, and I got in trouble for talking to strangers. We still ended up going to the park where I saw the man again. I was on the monkey bars and he asked me if I still wanted to play. Now I was starting to get a bit creeped out. I told him I wasn't supposed to talk to strangers and that my grandma was waiting for me. He said that if I won the game, I would get a present. I asked him where the present was, and he said it was in his car and that I should go with him to get it. I said no and started to run. He grabbed me and I started screaming. My grandma heard me and came running. She saw the man and got out her mace. He let me go, and my grandma sprayed him in the eyes until he was screaming. She called the cops on him, and he was arrested on the spot. We later found out he was a registered sex offender and a child molester. I am 14 years old and I live in Salt Lake City, just for a little background. And no, I am not a Mormon. Not that I have anything against Mormons or anything, I'm just saying. Anyways, the story goes like this. One day when my sister and I were young kids, about 10 years ago, we went to eat at McDonald's. As most kids do when they go to McDonald's, we love to play in the playland. So as we would always do, we played in the playland with my dad watching over us. After a while, my dad noticed a man in the playland taking pictures on his phone. He was a grown man, who I believe was somewhere in his late 20s. My dad was creeped out by this, so he confronted the man. My dad asked why he was in there, and the man replied by saying he was with his daughter in the playland. My dad told him to get out, as he was a grown man. The man then refused. The two of them got into an argument. My dad eventually punched up on the playland where the man was sitting and made the man jump up and slam his head. He then came out of the playland yelling at my dad. He then proceeded to leave the McDonald's with no daughter of his own in sight. This may not have been the scariest thing ever, but it's scary to think what the man's intentions were. It scares me to think that he might have taken photos of me or my sister. When my dad told me this story, I just laughed my ass off because of how my dad made this guy slam his head. But after some deep thought, I'm thoroughly creeped out. This happened about a year ago in my first semester of college. I went to an art school in New York City, and my suite mates and I had a craving for fast food at around 12:30 a.m. We decided on the McDonald's down the street because we're classy as fuck. It was me, my suite mate Kat, and her boyfriend Tom. We ordered our food. Kat and I decided to split a shit ton of chicken McNuggets and pick a table by the door. Tom and Kat are sitting next to each other, holding hands as couples do, and I'm sitting there being the awkward third wheel and gorging myself on nuggets. In walks a slightly disheveled gentleman who starts to wander aimlessly in the direction of the register. We think nothing of him. I watch as he goes to order his food and turn back to my friends to chat. Suddenly, Kat mutters, "Anna, behind you." So I turn around, and there's the slightly disheveled gentleman again. This time, he's holding a flashlight. I turn back around to Kat and shrug, figuring it's just some harmless weirdo. I feel a tap on my shoulder to turn. I turn around again, and the guy asks, "The light isn't working in the men's room. Can one of you hold this flashlight while I use the toilet?" Seriously? Kat, being the nicest and most outgoing person of the group, responds first. Maybe you tell an employee that the lights don't work. I bet they could figure it out for you. It'll only be a minute, the guy mutters and holds the flashlight out to us. Could one of you just hold this while I pee? He insisted. Tom answered next as I was determined to ignore the man. No, just go ask an employee to fix the lights. But I'll only be... The man began again, but I interrupted him with a firm, fuck off. It was a weird situation made only weirder when, as we were leaving, Kat said, he never went to the bathroom in the first place. How would he know the lights didn't work? When I was about 6 or 7, I used to take swimming lessons in a local pool after finishing school twice a week on Wednesday and Fridays. On Fridays, Mum would take me into McDonald's to get a milkshake as a treat afterwards. I'd sit and drink my shake, then we'd head home, no problems. This day was different. I'd finished my shake and wanted the toilet before we left. So in I went, into the ladies on my own as I usually did. I noticed one cubicle was locked and thought nothing of it. Went in the second, did my thing, flushed and noticed that the person in the other cubicle was unlocking the door too. I hadn't heard them flush. I turned around, and it was a man. Old, disgusting, and tall. Why was he there? I innocently said, "This is for ladies only, mister." And he said, "Why do you think I'm in here, little girl? It's music to my ears. Where is your mummy?" He took a few strands of my hair and twirled them between his grim fingers and reached a hand to grab me by the shoulder. I shook out of his grip and ran as fast as I could back to my mum, crying. I told her what happened. She told an attendant, but by the time they checked, he'd managed to slip out unnoticed and into the busy street. I hope he never managed to get his hands on any little girls ever again.
A few years back, I decided to move out of my mother's house. I had a girlfriend at the time, and eventually she moved in with me. We were both 19, and we were still in the honeymoon phase of our relationship. Where we lived was pretty small and only had a few restaurants. And the other thing was, we were introverts, so we liked staying in our apartment. Being that we always stayed in our apartment and lived in a small town, we always ordered DoorDash from the same places. We didn't have many choices. One night we were in bed and I was feeling a little frisky. I turned on a Nightmare Files YouTube video because his voice usually gets her in the mood. So that's exactly what happened, like clockwork. I turned on one of his videos and she was all over me. Anyway, we were hungry and I ordered some food on DoorDash. While waiting for our food, my girlfriend fell asleep. She was worn out. There was a Wingstop near our place, and I would always order from there. It was always the same dasher every time. So there was some trust there. In the delivery instructions, I put the code to get in the building. I picked the option where it cost more to get there quicker, but 30 minutes went by, and still nothing. I was already notified that my food was picked up about 15 minutes ago. But then I noticed that the delivery driver was right by my apartment building on the DoorDash map and has been there for about 8 minutes already. I looked outside my third-story window. Then I saw the same car that always delivers here. The lights were on and the car was running. I went to my bathroom real quick and all of a sudden, I heard my buzzer go off as if someone was at the front door downstairs and wants to get in. That's weird because the only person I was expecting was the DoorDasher, and he has the code. I walked to the intercom and I said, hello? Can I help you? Yeah, it's your DoorDasher, and I got jumped by some guy. He took my phone and the screen was unlocked, so at this time you should maybe call the cops. He's on his way up to your apartment. I buzzed the actual Dasher up, and as he was saying that, there was a knock at my door. All I heard after this was, "Hey, it's your DoorDasher. I have your order." I didn't say anything. Then another knock. I told him just leave it, and then he said, "Nah, I can wait. The people around here look pretty sketchy. I then told him it's okay and I'm not dressed. I told him to leave after that. Then there was a pause. So, what exactly are you wearing? And the guy started messing with the door handle trying to get in. I had a complete brain fart. I forgot to call the cops. At the same time, my girlfriend is limping out of our room, asking what was going on. Then I heard tussling and fighting outside our apartment door. I told her to go in our room and call the cops. I opened the door and the DoorDash guy was getting choked and beat up on the ground by the crazy guy. So I did what anyone else would do in the situation. I closed the door and I ran back in the apartment. That dude was so big. There was no need for both of us to get beat up or killed, so I'm good. I heard the fighting stop, and then there were more knocks at the door. Hey, it's the DoorDasher. I have your order. I thought to myself that this guy was out of his freaking mind. My girlfriend yelled from the other room that the police should be here soon. I looked out of my peephole as we were waiting, and the guy was just standing there, while the real DoorDash guy was laid out on the floor. The cops got there pretty quick and arrested the guy. When they got there, the DoorDash guy stood up and he told them what happened. So when he pulled up, he was updating something in his phone for DoorDash. As he stood outside of his car, all of a sudden, some guy came out of nowhere and smacked him a few times, then he punched him and knocked him out. He took his phone and the food and went to the apartment. I don't know who that guy was and why he chose us, but I'm glad that DoorDasher warned us. I've never had anything like this happen to me before, so I'm not sure if perhaps I'm overthinking it. I'm a relatively short girl, which is why I didn't even want to go outside and see if it was just a matter of the guy wanting to personally hand over the food. So yesterday at around 5 a.m., my friend had ordered me some DoorDash. We always put the leave at the door option, especially when it's in the morning, so it just turns into a matter of waiting for the dasher to leave. However, the guy I got yesterday scared the hell out of me. We had gotten a DoorDash notification that the food was dropped off, ready for pickup. I didn't notice until later, but there was no picture. I was just about to walk out, but before I opened the door, I looked out the window when I noticed that he was just standing there, not on his phone. Not trying to see if he was at the right house. Nothing. No kind of movement, just standing there. I was a bit confused, so I told my friend. I asked if she had put the leave at the door option, and she said she had. So I waited a bit before she decided to call and remind him to just leave it at the door. I can see his phone lighting up, but he never answered. He ignored every call and every text. He even answered once and immediately hung up on her. It wasn't even a matter of stealing my food. If that was the case, he would have just drove off with it. He spent a while waiting and at one point almost went out when I no longer saw him. But I realized that he was just standing behind one of the bushes. Then he just sat in his car across the street, waiting. He hadn't even left the food at the fence. He just took it with him and he waited in his car. He even drove off angrily, almost like he was upset that I didn't go out to see. So when he drove off, that was around the same time that he hung up on my friend. All the times that he waited, outside the fence, behind the bush, and at his car, it lasted around 10 to 15 minutes each. I had no doubt that this guy was up to something. He was a little weird. Then that was confirmed a few days later when I saw that a DoorDash driver tried kidnapping a little girl when she came out to get her food. And it was that same guy. I'm not gonna lie, that was one of the weirdest nights of my life. This happened about a year and a half ago. I was at work, night shift, a little past midnight, and I ordered some DoorDash for myself and my supervisor since it was her birthday. I was happy to see that I had the same driver as last time, as I work in a small building among other identical buildings with a convoluted road system in between them all. It can be a little confusing to someone not used to it. I had been watching the map and went outside when I saw that he was close. I stood under a cluster of bright lights in our parking lot, wearing neon yellow. You couldn't miss me. I immediately get a call from my driver asking me to come to him. I look around and I don't see anyone until I walk a couple yards to the center of the lot. He's sitting on the side of my building by the dumpster where there's no light. He also has his lights off. I'm thinking, what the hell, dude? I start waving my arms and telling him I'm in front of the building and he's on the side. He hangs up and just chills there for a minute. At this point, I'm really annoyed because our food is getting cold and this guy delivered to me before in the same exact spot a week before. Finally, he turns his lights on and comes over to me. As soon as he pulls up, he's speaking another language into his phone, which then translates in English. Something like, "Hello, I'm practicing English. I need new friends. Will you be my friend?" And then he puts the phone toward me. I feel like I'm speaking to a child and I just say, "Oh, that's a cool app." And I look at him, just waiting. We just stared at each other for a few seconds. Keep speaking into the app about needing friends, and I tell him that my supervisor is waiting for me, and I reach my hand out for the food. So when he reaches out, he actually touches my hand and then asks for my number, but he tugged on me slightly. At this point, the fact that he had tried to get me in the dark, plus his persistence, turned my growing annoyance into fear. I tell him I need the food, and he asked me to get in his car in perfect English. Thank the Lord that at this moment, someone in my sister building comes out and makes their way over to the lot. He finally gives me my food and scurries off, which freaked me out. Why after all of that would he speed off at the sight of another person? And how did he just learn English that quick? First he wasn't speaking it clearly, but then out of nowhere he spoke it very well. Clearly his intentions were not good. I reported all of this to DoorDash at the time, as well as my local police and social media. And it turns out that he's done this to someone before who lives about 2 miles away from me. She had also ordered late night, and he apparently asked her if she lived alone, and if they could hang out while holding her food hostage. DoorDash assured me they deactivated him, but his boldness plus the fact that he seems to only drive late at night makes me think he does this a lot and has probably already assaulted someone. Again, I'm just glad that other person walked out of that building next to ours.
I'm a female, age 22, and a few years ago I used to work at a Chick-fil-A. It was my first ever job, and I lived with my parents in a neighborhood nearby. I would walk to and from work every day because it was only a 15-minute walk and I didn't have a car. Both of my parents used the only cars that we had, and part of the reason I was working there was to save enough money so that I could buy my own. I was part-time and would work all sorts of hours. Mainly, I would work in the afternoons and nights on weekdays and earlier on the weekends. On one night, probably 4 months or so after getting the job, I was working pretty late. I think I got off at like 10 p.m. and then I left the restaurant to walk home. This wasn't uncommon at all, and by now the restaurant and the area were pretty quiet. This particular Chick-fil-A was near a few larger stores and a couple of other restaurants. I would take the sidewalk to the residential area less than a mile away, and my house was back there. As I left that night and started to walk on the sidewalk, I saw this one guy that was standing out in the Chick-fil-A parking lot. Before I had started walking 10 feet, the guy began approaching me. I had never seen him before, and I didn't know what he wanted. I was still wearing my Chick-fil-A clothes, and I had clearly just left the building, so I thought maybe he had a question about Chick-fil-A. I guess that's what I was hoping, because I had a bad feeling. The man walked closer, and then he reached me. I was sort of nervous, but I tried to act calm. When he got to me, he said hi in a friendly tone. The man said that he had noticed that I walked home every day from work and told me that it could be dangerous to walk alone at night. He said that he wanted to walk me home. It seemed pretty weird to me. I told the guy that I was fine and I was capable of getting home by myself. I had walked home by myself countless times, many of them at night. He asked if I was sure, and I said yes. The guy seemed disappointed, but then sort of walked away off into the parking lot of a nearby grocery store. Then I started walking home. I kept an eye out, and the guy didn't follow me or anything. As I was walking, I realized just how weird of a situation it was. The guy said that he noticed me walking home every night. Had he been watching me? When I did make it home, I looked around to make sure I wasn't followed still. I didn't see anybody. A few days later, I worked another later shift. I got off once again at roughly 10 p.m. This night, I had been working a long time and I wasn't thinking about the guy that I had seen the last time. He wasn't there though. I started walking home on the sidewalk like I always did. When I made it to the end of the sidewalk on the first street, I turned and then started to go into the residential area. The streets were much darker and there were not as many lights around. I walked past an apartment building first, and then there were many different other houses. All I had to do was walk to the end of this street, take a left, go 2 blocks, and then I was home. When I was walking past the apartment building, I thought I heard a noise. I looked over after hearing it. I saw that next to the apartment building there was a tree, and I thought I saw a guy sort of behind the tree. It was like he was hiding. His head was looking between 2 large branches. The tree was probably 15 feet away and really obstructed. I could still tell that it was the same guy I had seen a few nights earlier who was hiding behind it though. I looked away immediately and kept walking. When I did, I was really worried that I would hear him walk on the sidewalk behind me. Luckily, I didn't though. I walked as fast as I could back home. When I was back, I told my parents about the situation. They agreed to drive me to and from work after that. Only a few weeks later, I finally had enough money to buy a car, and from then on, I drove to and from work. I never walked to work again, and I never saw the guy again after that either. If I had to guess, I would say that he lived in those apartment buildings. That must have been how he had seen me walking home from work every single night. It really creeps me out that he probably saw me walk home many times without me knowing, especially the way that he was hiding behind the tree watching me. This happened a couple of months ago. It was a weekend afternoon, and I was really hungry. I went to the nearby Chick-fil-A, which is one of my favorite restaurants. I was really craving it, but when I got there, I saw that they were very busy. The line in the drive-thru was literally going out of the parking lot, so I decided to park and then walk inside. Sometimes this is faster than the drive-thru in my experiences. But when I got inside, I saw that there was a long line in there too. Lots of people were inside, and I got in line at the back. The line started moving up and I was getting closer to ordering, but about a minute after I got there, somebody got in line behind me. When they did, they got uncomfortably close. I felt like they were invading my personal space. I could tell that it was a man and that he was really tall, but I didn't turn around and look at him. When the line moved up, he did too, and he remained a really close distance away from me. He wouldn't move, and it was kind of annoying. I didn't want to be rude and tell him to back up, but he was probably less than a foot away from me. I inched closer to the people in front of me. When I did, the guy seemed to move up as well. Within 2 minutes probably, it was already my turn to order. I walked up to the register and finally away from the guy. I ordered and then walked over and waited. As I was waiting, I looked around casually. I saw the guy who had been standing so close to me. It had to be him. There was only one really tall guy there. He was standing about 10 feet away from me now. As soon as I looked at him, I saw that he was already looking at me. I then looked away. The guy had kind of big glasses and short hair. Several of us were just standing around waiting for food. When my name was called, I went up, got the food, and then left. All of my frustration from the guy being really close to me and staring at me was now gone. I was just really excited to finally eat. When I walked out the door though, somebody walked out right behind me. When I got outside, I noticed who it was. The tall guy that was standing really close to me. He didn't even have any food in his hands. As I walked to my car in the parking lot, the guy walked right behind me. I unlocked my door, and as I was getting inside, I saw the man go to the car right next to mine. That was his car. I started my engine, and he started his. I sat there waiting for him to back up first, but he didn't. He looked over at me a couple of times, I could tell, but I didn't look over at him. I didn't want to see him. After maybe 2 or 3 minutes, Both of us just sitting there in our running cars. I turned mine off. I was kind of concerned at this point, and I thought maybe the guy would try to follow me home or something weird. After turning my car off, I opened the door and got out. There was a Target store right by the Chick-fil-A. In fact, their parking lots connected. I figured I could walk in there and maybe lose the guy. I really didn't think he would follow me inside still. But when I started walking to the Target, he got out of his car and started following me. I made it about halfway through the Target parking lot and then looked behind me and saw the guy was still right there. He was maybe 10 feet away. I was frustrated and really tired of this guy. I took a few more normal steps and then turned around, and out of nowhere, I sprinted all the way back to my car. I looked behind me to see if the man would sprint as well. He turned around and faced me, but looked confused and did not chase after me. I kept running though. I'm sure if anybody saw me, they thought that I was really weird, but I didn't care. I made it back to my car, started it up, and left. I was able to make it home just fine without being followed. I don't think I have been to that Chick-fil-A ever since. I don't know what that guy's deal was either. How long would he have followed me, and what would he have done? I used to work at a Chick-fil-A. This was about 5 years ago now. One night, I worked until close. We were pretty busy that night, but by the final hour of work, the restaurant was basically empty. All of the customers were in the drive-thru. We had a couple here and there come inside, but not too many. I had been working, taking customers' orders. When it was just about time to close, I got out the mop to clean the floors. This is something that I often did as we were closing. I would clean the dining area and make sure that any customers knew that we were closing, if there were any. There appeared to be nobody in the dining room as I mopped. But then, as I looked around, I thought I saw a man. We had a play place at our location in the back of the dining room area. It looked as though there was a guy hiding in the play place. There was like a toy car that you could go inside, and it was connected at the top of the slides and other things that kids could play on. I could see the man's head looking out from the car window, then he ducked down. I was not happy to see this. As I mopped the floor, I hoped that the guy would leave, but it was clear that he wasn't planning on it. I decided that I would have to go over and tell the man that he had to get out of here. Adults were not supposed to be in the play place, first of all, and second, we were closing. I walked over and into the play place. I couldn't see the man at all now. When I got to the structure, I called out asking if the guy was okay. I got no answer. I moved back and looked to the window of the toy car again. I saw a man's face briefly appear for just a second. Then he ducked down and out of sight quickly. I said that we were closing now and everybody had to leave. Still nothing. I wasn't quite sure what to do. I decided to go back and tell my 2 coworkers who were still here what was going on. When I got back to the front counter area and was walking behind it, I heard some noise. I looked and saw a guy running out of the front door of the restaurant. I was glad to see him leave. I really didn't know what he was doing in there. After that, I finished up mopping the floors. Then I left. As I was walking out to my car, I saw the guy again. He was standing near the building on the end. When I looked in his direction, he quickly moved to around the corner. I left after that. I've always wondered what that man was trying to do, hiding inside. Was he planning to rob the place after we closed? That's my best guess. I also don't know why he was still hanging around afterwards. It was very mysterious.
When I was in college, I was broke with hella debt from different credit cards, so I decided to start an OnlyFans. I was very reluctant at first, then I just said forget it. I look good enough to make money, so why not? The first day that I was on there, I made it free to subscribe to me so I can get followers quick. Then I linked all of my social medias through my IG. My OnlyFans was on there also. My IG was public, so anyone could get it. Pause. I logged on and I started a live stream, and a few people got on. Then it was just one person. I wore glasses and the guy told me that I was gorgeous and to take my glasses off. So I did. Then he sent me $10. I told him thank you. Then a message popped up on the screen. You have nice lips. Can you put on red lipstick if you have it? I said, of course. So I got up and I got my lipstick. Sat down and I put my lipstick on. Then I was sent $25. I told him thank you. Then he asked, if I give you $100, will you do whatever I say for the next 15 minutes? I told him that I don't think that's worth it and I was about to log off. He said, no, not yet. What about 300? I gave the same answer. Then he simply just put 1,000 enough? I sat there and I thought about it. Then I said, yeah, I'll do it. Then I set an alarm for 15 minutes. The first thing he asked me to do was to blow him a kiss and smile. So I did. Then he told me to say that I love Adam. Then I said it. At that point, I was thinking that this was pretty easy. Then he asked me, do I have a red dress? I said, yeah. He then asked me to try it on. So I put the dress on and he called me beautiful. Then the weirdest request popped up. It simply said, cry. I asked him what that meant and he said he wants me to cry. So I sat there for a few seconds and I began to try to cry. He typed, nope, none of that fake stuff. I want real tears and emotion. I told him I don't know if I know how to do that. And he said, then no money then. I tried again and no luck. He then put $1,500 in the chat. Well, he typed it. I said, okay. And I walked into my kitchen, opened the refrigerator door, put my hand inside, and closed it as hard as I could. I walked back to my laptop and I began to cry. He put good girl in the chat. Then he asked me, do I have scissors? I said, yeah, why? He typed, cut your hair. I said no, then he typed $2,000 in the chat. I paused for a few seconds and I said, okay. I grabbed some scissors, sat back down, and then he typed, nah, use a knife, not scissors. Again, I paused and I said, okay. I grabbed a knife, sat down, and began to cut my hair. Then my ponytail was gone. He typed, you look good with short hair. Then he asked me to take my dress off, and I said no. Then he typed $2,500 in the chat. Then luckily my alarm went off, and I told him that time is up. Then he typed, how about 15 more minutes for $6,000? I said no. Then he asked, do you want these to go public? Then I received 77 photos. I clicked on them. They were from my iCloud. I asked him how he had my photos and he typed, if you don't do what I say for 15 more minutes, everyone that you know will see these photos. I told him, yeah, right, and I closed my laptop. And no lie, a few minutes later, I received over 50 text messages from family and friends that they saw my photos. My landlord told me not to worry about the rent and that he didn't know I was working with a dump truck back there and that I was thicker than a bowl of oatmeal. I don't even know what that means. And after that, honestly, I never went back on the OnlyFans. I went and got a real job, something safer. I became a stripper. But anyways, I changed my whole iCloud and everything. But that was the weirdest night of my life.
It all started with a Zoom call. At least, I only became aware it was happening because of a Zoom call. For all I know, it could have been happening for much longer, but the day of the second post-lockdown work meeting was the first time I noticed it. We're in the middle of a pretty tedious brainstorming session with a few members of marketing when a coworker interrupts whoever's talking to address me by name. It actually made me jump at first. I was totally tuned out, so hearing my name brought me right back around again. I respond, huh? Yep, I was listening. When I notice the person who addressed me is now closely studying their own laptop screen. I don't mean to alarm you, they said, but I think someone's watching you through the window behind you. I know exactly which window he's talking about, so I turn, a bit nervous at the idea of discovering he's right, only to see that there's no one there. I'm more relieved than anything, to be honest. I figured he was playing a joke on me because he clocked that I was nodding off during the meeting, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't maybe deserve it a little bit. Very funny, I said, and a few of the other callers had a little titter at the impromptu prank. I'm sorry, but I wasn't joking," the guy said. "Did no one else see that? I'm so sure." You're probably just seeing things," someone else chimed in, and within a few minutes, the whole thing was completely forgotten. A smudge on the screen, a bit of lag on the call, eyes playing tricks. There were 100 ways to explain it. The truth was literally unthinkable at that stage. A short while later, the exact same thing happens. The same guy interrupts, only far more urgently this time, saying, Look, it's right there. I'm not imagining it. You can all see that, yeah?" I know what he's talking about, only I don't turn around immediately. I look at my own webcam feed to see what he was talking about, and right when I see it, what's clearly the silhouette of a head in the window behind me, I hear one of the other callers say like, "Oh, wow, I see it too." I spin around just in time to catch the quick blur of whoever was watching me, ducking out of view. I'm actually really creeped out at this point because it obviously wasn't just somebody walking past my ground floor bedroom. Someone had actually stopped to stare inside. My window isn't even facing the street. It's at the side of the apartment block, like you have to actually go out of your way to find it. Now, I'm only 5'3" and I'm 8 stone, which for any Americans reading this means I'm tiny. And I had to make sure if someone was actually creeping on me, they weren't just hiding out and waiting until I was vulnerable. So, phone in one hand, kitchen knife in the other, I tell the Zoom call that I'll be right back and then head out to make sure that everything is kosher. It's peak lockdown during all of this, so the streets are pretty much deserted, so I'd think I'd have noticed anyone wandering around. But there was no one, not a soul in sight. So I guessed, or rather hoped, that it was just some neighbor kids messing around, maybe looking for a wayward ball or something. About a week goes by and the whole window face incident has been at the back of my mind the whole time. For a lot of young women who live alone, the idea of being targeted where we're most vulnerable is frankly terrifying. So the prospect of that nightmare coming to life just didn't bear thinking about. I'm not saying I was on edge the whole time or that I lose sleep over it or anything, but let's just say I held my keys a little tighter in my fists whenever I walk down the street my apartment block is on. But anyway, at one point I head out to the grocery store to pick up food and I ended up caught in one of those super long COVID lines that you're stuck in for like 40 minutes before you're allowed into the store to buy your stuff. This is on top of the fact that the store near me had implemented this dumb one-way system in the aisles in an attempt to stop the spread. My point is, a trip that would have normally taken like half hour ends up taking more like 90 minutes, and an annoying amount of my day has been completely wasted. So I'm already in a bad mood by the time I get back to my apartment, only to find that the front door has been bashed in. Apparently, there had been a break-in while I was out. If only criminals could work from home. It seemed obvious that it was a burglary at first. All my stuff had been strewn around, drawers and cabinets were opened and emptied. The TV was still there, along with my PlayStation, but most break-ins just go for jewelry and phones, I heard. Anything small that they can pawn easily. Obviously, I called the cops like there and then, who arrived within a half hour or so. They advised me to help them look around the apartment for anything that might be missing, valuable electronics and whatnot, but I told them I already looked and that nothing obvious seemed to have been taken. My bedroom looked like it had been hit by a bomb. Clothes had been strewn all over the place. Whole drawers had been pulled out and flipped, like whoever broke in was looking for something. One of the cops spent some time looking around in there before he called out to his partner. "Hey, we need forensics up in here," is what he actually said. I asked him what the deal was, if he'd found something that I should know about. Both cops had been warm, friendly, and helpful up until that point, but when I asked him why forensics was needed, one of them told me not to worry about it and to stay out of my bedroom for the time being. It was no big deal at first. I was just grateful that they showed up so fast, even if they did wear masks and insist on keeping 6 feet between us at all times. So by the time forensics team showed up, I'm out front of my apartment building talking to my mom on the phone. Only when I see what they're actually doing in my apartment, it triggers what I can only describe as a mini freakout. Guys in gloves and white coverall suits have been scooping big handfuls of my underwear into bags, sealing them, then taking them out to their truck outside. And then it dawns on me, whoever broke into my apartment had left DNA on my underwear. I probably don't need to tell you how exactly they'd done that. The whole thing grosses me out too much for me to actually type it. But the thing that really got to me was, if I'd actually been home that afternoon, there's no telling what would have happened if some violent perv had actually gotten their dirty hands on me. But anyway, the story does actually have something of a resolution and thankfully a happy ending, because they had this guy's DNA. Police were able to match it on their database with a guy who'd had multiple run-ins with the law for public exposure, among other things. He was arrested, and he's now looking at 3 years in prison for aggravated burglary, some kind of charge like that. But the whole thing came full circle for me in an interview with some detective who'd mentioned that this guy liked casing his victims' places before he struck. Over the past month or so, have you seen anyone hanging around your apartment who doesn't live there, maybe someone looking through your window? He said it. He literally said it. It was him, that day when I was in the Zoom call. It was him that had been looking through my window. He'd been stalking me for God knows how long, and when it came for him to actually get me, only by the grace of God was I lucky enough to have been out grocery shopping. Otherwise, it doesn't bear thinking about what might have happened.
For a few years, I tried my hand at scrapping in my area for a living, and surprisingly, I did pretty well for myself. Scrap metal was abundant in my town, and people would even offer to pay me to take their dead utilities like washing machines and ovens off their hands, which I would then take to the scrapyard and make a quick little bit of money. Now, a big source of my contacts ended up coming from social media, such as Instagram or Facebook Marketplace, and for the most part, everything went smoothly. But every now and then, I would get a shady seeming opportunity that I would have to think twice about. I'll never forget when I was messaged on Facebook to pick up a broken lawnmower and a torn down shed from a property about an hour away from my house. It was in September of 2017, and I typically didn't pick up scrap after dark because the yard was usually closed by then. But it seemed like this guy had a lot for me to pick up, and he claimed to only be able to meet after he got home from work around 6 p.m. So I figured, why not? What's the worst that could happen, right? The day came that I was supposed to meet him, and I messaged him to confirm that everything was still good to go. And once I got the okay, I hopped into my truck and began making my way to the man's house. There wasn't much traffic, so the drive only took about 45 minutes. But by the time I got to the small, one-lane road where the man lived, the sun had already set. The road was surrounded by thick woods on either side of it, and it almost looked like the guy's house was the only one on the entire road. After driving a bit down the one-lane road, I finally saw a beat-up looking mailbox that had the number 43 on it, which let me know that I had reached my destination. I slowly pulled into the driveway, and the first thing that I noticed was how overgrown the yard looked. From the looks of things, the lawnmower had been broken for some time. As I got closer to the house, I could tell from the dim light shining through the window that the owner was home. I parked my truck, and before I could take my phone out to send the man a message, I noticed someone coming out of the front door. It looked like the guy that I was there to meet, so I shut my truck off and stepped outside. As soon as my foot touched the pavement, I practically jumped out of my skin when I heard what sounded like a very large dog barking. The man came down the stairs and claimed that I didn't have anything to worry about and said the dog was inside. But I still couldn't help but flinch with every step I took, wondering if I was going to be attacked. I did my best to follow the man around as I began gathering all the scrap metal that he had for me. But about halfway through my trips, back and forth from the yard to my truck, I couldn't help but feel like I was hearing the sound of a child screaming underneath the sound of the loud barking. I tried to remain calm as I said my goodbye to the man, and as soon as I hit the road, I pulled my phone out and called my wife to tell her what just happened. She was concerned with what I had heard and said that I should call the police, and I was happy that I did. I informed the officer that I heard a child crying and what sounded like an aggressive animal inside a rundown home. And when they showed up, they ended up finding a small child who did not belong to the owner. It turned out to be a missing child from 2 states away who had been missing for more than 3 weeks at that time. There was also reportedly no dog on site, and the police believe the man was using the recording of a dog barking that was being played over speakers to try to drown out the child for crying for help. When the case went to court, it turned out that the only reason he needed the scrap removed in the first place was that his landlord was going to evict him if he didn't get it out of there.
Alright, so this occurred when I was 16, and because of what happened, I will never use social media again. It was getting near the end of the school year, which meant that we would have the summer off in a couple of weeks. It also meant that teachers would let the class have free time and rarely give out assignments. Anyway, I was in class sitting with my friends chatting as our teacher did give us free time. We were pretty much talking about all the things girls in high school would talk about. What we were doing over the summer, college, jobs, a car, and even graduation. As one of my friends was talking about how her boss just fired her from her job, I got a notification from Facebook on my phone. A username that I have never seen before sent me a friend request. Let me be as clear as I can. Getting friend requests from unknown users is no big surprise to me. What I would do is if I knew the person, I would accept their request and request to be their friend as well, but if I didn't know who they were, I would just accept the request or decline it. In this case, I didn't know who this person was, so I declined him. Just then, I received another notification on my phone from Facebook. It was the same username, and he sent me a direct message. It read something along the lines of, "Hey, you're really pretty. Would you like to chat?" I responded telling him that I didn't know who he was and apologized. Keep in mind, this guy looked to be about 40 and I was 18 at the time, so this was starting to become very creepy. My friends eventually wanted to see what I was up to, and so I showed them the chat. 2 of my friends really didn't care, and the others said to just block him. I felt like blocking him wouldn't be the right thing to do at the time, so I just left it alone. When I got home, I received another notification on my phone from the same guy. He said that we will get to know each other and that we would start a, quote, romantic relationship. I was beyond creeped out at this point, and so I blocked him and thought it was over. I'd say not even 10 minutes later, I received another message from Facebook, but with a different username. It read, "Why did you block me? I want to get to know you." I told him to leave me alone, and that he was way too older than me, and that if he didn't stop, that I would call the police and report him. He then started using profanity and making threats, and that he was going to find me and kill me. I blocked him once again and called the cops, but of course they couldn't do anything since he really didn't commit a crime. I find that BS, but whatever. His account was also taken down, and even if the police could track him, I couldn't remember his username. About a week or so went by, and I was starting to forget about what happened. I just wanted to graduate high school and be done. But a few days later, I was home alone in my room on my computer when I heard my dogs barking at something. I went to go see what they were barking at. They were barking at something outside of the sliding glass door, but I couldn't see anything since it was dark out there. I looked a bit harder, and I could see someone standing in our yard, looking straight at me. He then took off running, and I never saw him again. I have no idea if whoever that was the person on Facebook, but I believe that it might have been.
For the longest time, I was looking for a specific Funko Pop from a limited Marvel series that had come out. I've been collecting them ever since I was with my ex-boyfriend, who actually got me into comic books. And even though we had a pretty nasty breakup, I still wanted to complete my collection and continue to love everything Marvel and DC. Well, after about 3 years of looking for the final pop that I needed for my collection, I saw that someone named Aaron had listed it for sale on the Facebook Marketplace. After exchanging a couple messages, we both figured out a good time to meet, which ended up being around 8 p.m. the following night. The two of us agreed to meet at the mall because Aaron claimed to have some clothes shopping to do, and I actually needed to pick up my younger brother from his job at the pretzel stand, so it worked out. When the time came, I pulled into the mall parking lot at the entrance closest to the JCPenney, which was where we agreed to meet. And before I even made it to an empty parking spot, I recognized my ex's car. James loved his red Miata, and we took so many pictures of it that I could pick it out from a lineup. I decided that I didn't want to deal with him, so I ended up driving over to the movie theater parking lot and sending Aaron a message letting him know I was there. However, about 2 minutes after I sent the message, I noticed that Aaron had seen it, but not replied, and before I could send him another message to make sure that he actually saw it, I saw James in my rearview mirror walking toward my car. I'm glad the car was locked, because as he walked up to my door, he tried to open it. When he realized he couldn't, he began yelling through the window asking me to just hear him out. I ignored him and pulled out my phone to message Aaron and my brother to let them know what was happening. But when he saw Aaron's name on my phone, James said something that surprised me. "He's not coming, you know," he said. I looked up at him, confused as to why he would say something like that. That was when he let me know that he was James and created the account and the marketplace post because I had been ignoring him. I immediately began to freak out and began texting my brother letting him know that I would meet him in a different parking lot. There was no way I was getting out of the car at that point. But the more I ignored James to text my brother, the angrier he got. And eventually he got so mad that he began smacking my window to get my attention. I turned my car on, and as I put my car in reverse, James smacking turned to him punching, and I screamed as he began trying to break my window and yelling at me to stop. He kept yelling, "I just want to talk to you." But I had never seen him so angry. I pulled out as fast as I could in fear of my life and began driving around the mall wondering where I would be safe to pick up my brother. I was afraid that James was following me. Eventually, my brother texted me back and told me that he was standing outside of the entrance near the side of the mall and that I could swing by and pick him up. I liked this plan because I didn't have to actually park. I grabbed my brother and we began driving home. The entire time I was paranoid that James was following me. Thankfully, there was no sign of him after returning to my house. My father ended up messaging his parents and letting them know that if he stepped foot near me again, we would be filing a restraining order. That was the last time I heard from him. But I'll never forget the look on his face as he tried to break my window to get to me. I had just purchased a new car after finally saving up enough money, and since my driveway had limited space, I decided to sell the Hyundai that I used to drive. I tried asking around to see if any of my friends or family members might need a car, but when no one was offering to buy it, I decided to list it on the Facebook Marketplace. It was a 2003 Sonata with 140,000 miles, and based on what I saw similar cars going for on the site, I listed it for $4,000 or best offer. I was a little surprised at how long it took before someone finally messaged me about the car, but after about 2 weeks, I finally felt like I had a solid offer. I had to drop the asking price to $3,400, but when the guy messaged me, offered to pay cash, I decided to take the money rather than wait for a better offer. The man's name, according to Facebook, was Lucas, and after discussing it, he asked me if I would be able to meet him at a garage that he supposedly owned. He claimed to not have a working vehicle at the moment and was hoping I would be able to drop the car off. And not thinking anything of it, I checked to see how far the garage was from my house and asked my friend if he would follow me in his car and drive me home after I made the sale. My buddy Jeremy said that it wouldn't be a problem, and when the time came, I drove over to Jeremy's house so that he could follow behind me till we got to the garage. The route to the garage was mostly highway for the first 15 or so minutes of the drive, and then we had to take the side roads for another 5 minutes before the GPS told me that I had reached my destination. I could see the garage, but in my rear view, there was no sign of Jeremy. I figured that I must have lost him at the light or something, but considering I put the address into his phone, I figured he would be there shortly. I planned on waiting in the car until he got there, but before I could message Lucas to let him know what was going on, I could see 3 men coming out from the side of the garage. I tried to see if any of them looked like Lucas's profile picture, but as far as I could tell, he wasn't there. I hoped that they just happened to be walking in the direction of my car and were just going to pass me. Sadly, that's not what happened. As the 3 men got closer to my car, I could tell that they were heading right for me. I smiled and nodded, thinking that maybe they just wanted to know who I was and why I was there. But before I could even begin rolling down my window, the man closest to me pulled a gun out of his waistband and pointed it in my direction. My hands instinctively left the steering wheel and went up in the air as I hoped and prayed for him not to pull the trigger. His 2 friends approached my door and opened it with ease as I didn't have the chance to lock it. And before I knew it, I was on the ground. I tried not to make any sudden moves as the men loaded into my car, and within a second, they were pulling away. It all happened in under a minute, and I was in absolute shock. On one hand, I was glad to be alive, but on the other, I was still really confused about what just happened to me. I got up off the ground and looked down the road to see if Jeremy had caught up yet, but there was no sign of his car. I walked over to the garage and looked inside, and that was when I realized that I had been conned from the beginning. Through a window, I could see that the garage had been abandoned for God knows how long, and before I even pulled out my phone to check, I knew that Lucas had used a fake profile. I opened up Facebook and tried to find his profile only to discover that his account had been deleted, even though it was active right before I pulled up to the garage. I called the police while I waited for Jeremy to arrive and reported the car stolen. Jeremy eventually showed up, and the 2 of us got out of there as fast as we could. Every now and then, I wonder what happened with that car, but as far as I know, the police never found it. All I know is I'll never use Facebook to sell something like that again.
My name is Jamie. A few years ago, several strange things started happening. It all began around Facebook. I logged into my account one day to find a new message from somebody. I used Facebook pretty regularly at the time, and I had for years. Over all the time that I had a Facebook, I received hundreds of friend requests. I certainly didn't know many of the people on my friends list. I would probably get about 5 to 10 friend requests per week on average, and most of the time I would just accept them. The message that I had received looked like spam. It was like multiple links, and those links were really long. There was no text to go along with the links, and I didn't open them. It was sent from some guy with no profile picture. I figured that he was some spam account, and I accidentally accepted a friend request from him or something in the past. I deleted the conversation and unfriended the guy, but only the next day, I got a very similar message. It was from another user. This time, the user did have a profile picture, but it was really generic. I think it was just a logo of a sports team. This person had also sent some random links. By now, I was suspecting that there was some type of Facebook hack going around, and spam messages were being sent. I just deleted them and went on, but they didn't stop. The next day, I had spam messages from multiple accounts. I was wondering what was going on. Then, the day after that is when things got even weirder and took a creepy twist. I saw that I had a friend request, and when I looked at it, the username was Jamie Smith Sucks. Jamie Smith is actually my real name, and I also got a friend request with somebody with the username Jamie Smith is an idiot. I clicked on these profiles, and they looked like they had just been created. Somebody was seemingly trying to mess with me. I didn't know who, and I didn't know why. Obviously, I declined those goofy friend requests, and I decided that I would not go on Facebook for a few days. I deleted the app from my phone, and I didn't go on it through my laptop either. But I couldn't escape the strange things. The next day or two went by fine, but then, one night at about midnight, there was a knock on my front door. I lived by myself in an apartment, and I walked over to the door wondering who would be there so late. No one was there when I looked. The next day, this happened again. A knocking at my door, but nobody was there when I looked outside. The day after that, I left my place to find that there was a picture on the floor right in front of my door. The picture was my Facebook profile pic, and it appeared as though somebody had just printed it off on a piece of paper. This was really starting to concern me, but I had no idea what could be done about it. The last straw was the next day. It was 11 o'clock at night, and I was home in my apartment. There was once again another knocking at my front door. Immediately following the knock, I heard that the knob to the door was turned. Luckily, the door was in fact locked. I walked over and looked out. No one was there again. I opened up the door, and on the ground was at least 100 pieces of paper with my profile picture printed on them. They were all stacked in a pile. I took them all and went to the police the next day. I told them everything and made a report. Beyond that, there wasn't much that I could do. But surprisingly, after I went to the police, everything just stopped. There was no more knocks at my door, no more things left outside, and no more weird Facebook messages or friend requests. I still don't know who did that to me, though. This happened many years ago in 2013. I used Facebook quite a bit back then, but I don't really use it at all anymore. On a daily basis, I would use the Facebook app on my phone and had the Messenger app as well. I talked to several of my friends that way, and when this happened, I was about 19 years old. I had probably upwards of 500 friends on there, which is a lot of people, but I've seen accounts with thousands. Anyways, I got a friend request from a girl named Veronica. I saw that we had about 5 mutual friends, and based on her picture, she looked nice. I looked at her profile page, but there wasn't much there. Just her age, which was also 19, and she had 2 pictures, and I saw that she had about 200 friends. After skimming over her page, I didn't actually know who she was, but I accepted the friend request. Our mutual friends were some people who I had gone to high school with, but didn't really know all that well as one other person who I didn't go to high school with, but lived in the general area. Not too long after I accepted her request, she sent me a message. I went to the Messenger app and I started talking with her. She was really cool and we hit it off. We talked for probably about a week before we wanted to meet up. I knew that she lived in the area, but I didn't know exactly where. Veronica suggested that we meet at a local mall, and there was a really popular shopping center about 10 minutes from my house. We decided to meet that Saturday at 11 a.m. In the meantime, we kept talking quite a bit, just like usual. When it was Saturday, I drove to the mall and went inside. It was pretty busy with it being a weekend. I had let Veronica know when I was leaving, and I think she left at around the same time as me. When I got inside, I messaged her that I was there, but that's when she stopped replying to me initially. At first, she told me that she was inside the mall and would look for me, but after that, I told her where I was and she didn't go there. I was standing in the food court for like 10 minutes and didn't see any sign of her. I reached out to her again, but did not get a response. I did see that she had seen my message though. When she didn't show up for another 5 minutes, I decided to walk around the mall looking for her. I figured that maybe the signal on her phone was bad or something, or maybe she had put her phone in her pocket with our conversation still open. I was just telling myself things like that, but I started to get a bad feeling. The mall was pretty big. It wasn't like the Mall of America or anything, but it was a decent size, and it did have 2 levels. There were also a lot of people there, so it would be tough, but not impossible to find someone. At one point though, when I was looking around, I did see this one guy who kind of looked like he was staring at me from afar. When I walked all around the mall, I saw the guy again, but he was walking a ways back behind me. I walked around for maybe 20 minutes. I really wanted to meet Veronica, but the more I walked around, the more I felt like she wasn't actually there. Then, finally, I felt my phone vibrate. I looked, and Veronica had sent me a message. She said, "Come to the entrance by the food court." That was the first area that I had been, and I had told her when I was there. I walked back over to it, which took me about 2 or 3 minutes. When I got back there, I looked around. It was still crowded, but I didn't see Veronica. I was a good ways away from the entrance doors, and I started to walk over to them. But that's when I noticed that the same guy that I had seen multiple times before was right there. He was standing right by the entrance and kind of looking around. Then, when he made eye contact with me for a brief moment, he walked behind one of the doors. I started to get suspicious, and I decided that I was just going to leave, but I was going to leave in a different door than that one. I began walking in the opposite direction. When I did, I noticed the guy then start to walk through the food court towards me. I picked up the pace and turned a corner to another hallway. I walked quickly and did make it to the exit. I didn't see the man behind me when I made it there. After that, I walked around the mall on the outside until I made it to the parking lot that I had parked in. Then I drove home. By the time I was home, I looked and saw that I had a message from Veronica. The message said, "Why didn't you come to the food court entrance like I asked? Why did you just leave?" By this time, I knew that Veronica likely didn't exist, and the one guy that I saw was running the account. I asked her to send me a picture of herself right now. Then she blocked me. That pretty much confirmed my suspicions. I was disappointed, obviously, but I also felt good that I wasn't a victim to anything further than being catfished. From that point forward, I was much more careful with who I talked to online.
A little while ago, I saw an ad on Facebook Marketplace where a woman claimed to be giving away free gerbils. Apparently, the boy-girl pair she owned had produced a huge litter of little gerbil babies, and since there was way too much for her to handle, she was just going to give them away to a handful of loving homes. The ad didn't include the grim little factoid that the gerbil mom would probably eat her babies if she didn't think she could take care of them, but I figured, so I got in touch. The woman turned out to be a widow who had originally bought the gerbils to keep her company. I did think it was kind of unusual that she didn't just get herself a cat or dog if loneliness was the issue, but hey, different strokes for different folks, right? I'm not one to judge. And she seemed so sweet when I called her to arrange a date and time to go pick up 2 of the gerbils. Needless to say, I did not expect her to be living in the conditions she was, because when me and my dad arrived at her home with the little straw-bedded cage to take the gerbils home in, the whole exchange took a turn for the worse. So we called over at the gerbil lady's place, and at first there was no reply. Then when she finally answers the door, we can see she's in quite a sorry state. One of her eyes is swollen and bloodshot, with some super gross-looking yellow gunk collecting in the corner of the eye. But we remain polite and just ignore it. The last thing me and Dad wanted to do was offend or upset the lady by pointing out what was an already obvious medical condition. But when she invites us inside, we get a clue as to how she got sick in the first place. Her little house reeked like it was the single worst stench that ever graced my nostrils, and there were gerbils everywhere. And I mean everywhere. And much like their owner, they were not in good condition. Just from the gerbils that were skittering around the kitchen, I could see that many of them were missing fur and patches, or had painful-looking growths around their legs or backs. Then when she invited us into her TV room for a cup of tea, we could see it was even worse in there. We had to make up some excuse about how we couldn't stay for long after me and my dad shot each other a telepathic look that basically said a giant nope. And with the amount of gerbil poop that clogged up every little corner and skirting board, it was absolutely no wonder that she had some kind of infection. And when I caught sight of an actual tiny rodent skeleton behind one of her curtains, I went into full improv mode to get us out of there. I turned to my dad, named some piece of important gerbil habitat that we hadn't picked up from the store yet, wink wink, but then agreed that, oh, we can't possibly bring home the gerbils without insert name of doodad here, and we'll have to call by again in a couple of days. I remember us both sitting in the car afterward, just kind of in shock at what we'd just seen. The fact that someone could live like that was just depressing and terrifying to me. She obviously had no one coming to check on her, and anyone who thought it was okay to keep a home like that must have been losing their marbles. It sucked having to make a decision like we did. I felt really mean basically snitching, but we just had to call animal rescue, for her benefit more than anything else. The ASPCA rep we spoke to said that they'd investigate and let us know what their call was going to be, and in the end, they got back in touch, thanking us for the tip. Not only was the gerbil lady now in touch with a local charity that would help check up on her in her twilight years, but her house was considerably cleaner and safer after they've cleared out almost 100 gerbils from her property. They said the situation was so bad that the only thing that kept the infestation from spreading were the neighborhood cats. I did remember seeing a bunch of strays hanging around outside, but I figured it was just because she was the local animal lover who would routinely feed them treats or whatever. Turns out she was breeding treats for them, just not in the way she might like to think. The creepiest thing about it was that, from standing outside her home, you'd never have guessed at the horror show waiting for you on the inside. And the whole thing just reminds me that we don't really know what's going on behind closed doors, even the ones closest to us. Behind the facade of normalcy, we have no idea what our friends and neighbors are up to, or what nightmarish conditions they're living under.
I don't know if you would find this scary, but it's definitely creepy to say the least. This happened back in 2020, right when the pandemic was at its highest, specifically in December. I've just turned 18 years old, and I'm a female. Due to the restrictions of having small parties or no parties at all for the holidays, my parents and I decided to do a car parade. I only invited my closest friends, so it wasn't anything big. My birthday was the day before the car parade, so I posted a selfie on my Snapchat story. I rarely post on it now, since Snapchat is kind of pointless these days. I received many birthday greetings from friends and acquaintances, so I had a really great birthday. Although the next day, I had woke up in the morning and were making meal preparations for the car parade. Instead of having the guests stay over, we decided to make the food and then put them into styrofoam boxes and hand them out. While my parents were getting ready to cook that morning, I had got a text on Snapchat from a guy I've known since my freshman year of high school. To give some background information, he was a junior when I was a freshman. How we knew each other is that he was a teacher's assistant for one of my teachers. I sat in the farthest side of the room, so he was beside me most of the time. Anyways, we had stopped talking ever since that time, and I somehow got his Snapchat. Let's call him Rick for this story. I had opened the Snapchat to see that Rick had greeted me a belated birthday. I didn't think much of it, just another acquaintance greeting me happy birthday. I told him thank you and went on with my morning. About 1 or 2 minutes later, Rick texted me back. From then on, it had started off as a normal conversation. He asked what I was doing, and I told him that I was preparing for the car parade that I was throwing. I thought that I was going to catch up with him because it had really been a while since we last talked, primarily because he went off to the military after he graduated high school. Since we texted continuously, I'm not really the type of person who likes to continue the conversation after a certain amount of time, especially if I have rare interest in the person. So my dad and I were getting ready to head out to go get balloons and my birthday cake. I didn't have my license nor my own car at the time, so I couldn't get them myself. While I was waiting for my dad to put his shoes on, Rick continued to text me. I don't really remember what he exactly said or what led up to this moment, but he then said something like, "Let me snatch you up." Something around those lines. In my mind, I was like, okay. I thought he was joking, so I replied back with, "Laughing my ass off. You're joking, right?" With a crying laughing face emoji after that. His reply to that made me tense up and very uncomfortable. "Maybe I wasn't kidding," he said. What the f***? Now I have anxiety. After reading that comment, it made me start to hyperventilate. I then told him that I have to run some errands and hoping that he'll stop texting me after that. I didn't plan on texting him again for the whole day after that whole conversation. And you know what? Later that evening, after the car parade and blowing out the candles and the cake, that creep texted me again. In the back of my mind, I was like, ugh, why is he texting me again? However, when I had opened the message, I had really cringed so hard. "Hey cutie, how's it going?" is what he said. Honestly, that name just makes me cringe and it really makes me uncomfortable, especially coming from a guy that I haven't talked to in a long time. So I replied back with a, "Hey," not wanting to seem rude. He then asked me what I was doing, so I told him that we just finished the car parade. He then said, "Why don't you let me see you, cutie?" Oh hell no. He's one of those guys. Right at that moment, I had started to shake. My anxiety started to rise once again. All I felt was nervousness, scared, angry, and guilt at that moment. I'm not that stupid to give in and send a picture of me to him. I replied back with a no with the skull emoji, and he said, "What? Why not?" with a sad emoji, trying to make me feel sympathetic and give in. Yeah, right. I replied back with a, "Because I said so." About a minute later, he'd sent me a picture. It was a picture of himself holding a finger gun to his head, captioned, "Pew." In my mind, I was like, okay, what do you want me to do about it? Is that pic supposed to make me feel guilty? I just said in the chat a simple LOL and exited out of the app. He then kept begging me to send a picture of me, but instead, I replied with either no or just me trying to dodge the question. My responses were just starting to get more bland. That's not really like me, but that's because he made me highly uncomfortable. Now, you're probably wondering why I didn't just immediately block him. I guess it didn't really cross my mind at the time, because I was just overwhelmed and anxious, that I didn't think anything else other than having to deal with him longer. Really dumb on my part. Anyways, I didn't tell my parents nor any of my friends while I was having the conversation with them. However, our conversation finally ended after I finally told him how uncomfortable I felt when I was talking to him. To be honest, I'm not usually that straightforward with others, because again, I get really anxious, and I also tend to overthink way too many things. When I told him that, he finally got the idea. Dumbass should have gotten the idea when I said no in the first place. Since then, the conversation died down, and the next day I just blocked him. For the next few days to a week, I couldn't stop thinking back to that conversation. What made me heavily think about it is the fact that he texted me out of nowhere when he saw I just turned 18. Isn't that a coincidence? A guy that I've known since freshman year and has never spoken a word to me for 2 to 4 years, all of a sudden tries to flirt me up after I've turned 18. Yeah, it should be quite obvious. I never thought I would have to deal with a situation like this because I'm a really reserved person as well. So I try to avoid the situations as much as possible, but apparently that didn't happen. To all of you out there, please be aware of these signs and just instantly block the person. Don't deal with them any longer. Don't do the same shit that I did. Just block them from the start when you start to get the uncomfortable vibe from them. This was a few years ago. I was about 18 or 19 and I had been single for a good while focusing on work and school. One day, I was at one of my really good friend's house. We'll call her Blue. I was at her house for a family barbecue. She was talking about this online friend she had, and she had showed me a picture, then telling me, "This is Ryan." She told me how they met, and he was 24. The age gap didn't really bother me, as she said he was just a friend, and Blue usually never met up with people she met online. I told her he seemed nice, and after a while, we had sat in her room, and she was on FaceTime with him. I was doodling in my notebook, and we had been dressed fairly nicely for the barbecue, so my hair and makeup were done. Anyway, at some point, Blue turns her phone, and she has Ryan say hi to me. I looked up from my notebook, and I waved, giving a small smile. I've never really been a sociable person. After a while of them talking, they had ended their chat, and Blue had looked at me, smiling like a devil. The fuck did I do? I asked her, and just as I had, my phone vibrated. I looked at my phone, then at her. I slowly flipped it over, and on my notification bar was my Snapchat. So-and-so has added you. I opened it and saw a chat, and it read, "Hey, don't be mad at Blue, but I thought you were really pretty with your glasses and the way your hair looked. So I asked her to give me your snap." I felt my face then blush, as I don't really handle compliments well. Blue started laughing, and she said, "Come on, say something to him." I thought it was a bit weird that as her own online friend, he would ask for my snap. But nonetheless, being naive and trying to be nice, I responded. Ryan was nice, but something felt off during our conversation. When we talked about where we lived, I told him I lived in San Jose, and he said he lived in Livermore. Now, for those of you who don't know, they're about a 1-hour drive from each other, and at the time, my parents wouldn't let me drive that far. So for our first date, after much back and forth, we had planned to meet in Pleasanton, which is about 45 minutes. I hadn't taken into account the amount of freeway I'd have to drive, and Ryan said he couldn't make the drive because his mother had his car. Halfway there though, I got really anxious, and I had to call Blue because my GPS had been driving me through the woods to get around the traffic. When I finally got to the destination, Ryan had arrived a few minutes before me. I got out, and I apologized for my arrival. He said it was no problem. We went in, and we proceeded to play some mini golf. After the sun went down, I checked the time, and I realized if I were to get home before curfew, I'd have to leave really soon. I had told Ryan that I had a curfew and just how strict my parents were beforehand. When I told him I had to leave, his emotion changed. He went from joking and polite to serious and annoyed. He kept asking and bugging me to stay even longer. Would it really be so bad if you stayed? Just a bit longer. Can't we finish first? I kept trying to let him down easy, but I eventually gave him a really firm no. We returned to the golf clubs, and I walked to the cars. Even though I was now feeling a bit off, when he leaned in, I gave him a small hug. But I wasn't ready when he pulled me in and landed a kiss right on my lips. I pulled back and said goodnight, jumped in my car, and then left. I called Blue and ranted to her about the whole thing. She tried to calm me down about the whole thing, saying it was just first date jitters and being out of the game. As I got close to home, we hung up and I tried to let it go. A few days later, I was at work, and during some dead time, I was on my phone chatting with Blue and Ryan individually. Ryan wanted to meet up again, and I was okay with it. He seemed a bit pushy, but I paid it no mind. However, I probably should have blocked him. When it came to the day for us to hang out, I was at work and my shift was almost over. Now, my work is only 5 to 10 minutes away from where I live, and I had never given Ryan my exact address or had it available on Snap. Anyways, when it came to the day of our planned meetup, we were supposed to meet up on the fringe of San Jose because I still didn't want him knowing where I lived. I had told Blue, and she knew the whole plan. When it came to the day of, I was a few minutes away from getting off work, and Ryan texted me on Snap. He said that he needed a rain check. I asked if everything was okay, but he said that everything was fine, and that his mom just didn't want him driving all the way over here. I said no worries, but was a bit irked. As I had defied my strict parents, I lied to them and drove all the way out there to see him, but I guess I could chalk that up to childhood differences. After all that, the irk feeling passed relatively quickly. I left the chat and I had messaged my cousin Benny and my other friend Rez. I told them that my date rain checked and that we should have a movie night. They both replied yes, and after I texted my parents, I had put down my phone and did some quick cleaning. After I clocked out, I had sat in my car and checked some of the messages I had. Ryan had messaged me saying something along the lines of, "Oh hey, never mind, I can come down." And I'd responded back telling him, "Oh, sorry. After you rain checked, I texted my younger cousin and we made plans." He immediately seemed angry. He wanted me to cancel, and we got into a small fight. He kept saying that I should cancel on my cousin, who's honestly like a little sister to me. When I told him no, he canceled first and we can just reschedule. He wouldn't have it. He eventually turned to Blue and started ranting to her. I turned off my phone and just went to pick up my cousin. We had our movie night, and it was fun. But the next day, after I took my cousin home, I looked at my phone and saw a shitload of messages from Ryan. The last one terrified me. He said he was on his way to see me. I called Blue, and my tone was angry, irritated. I wasn't taking any shit. I asked straight away if she gave my address to Ryan. She stopped and said no. She got the hint and she asked what happened. I told her that he said he was on his way, that he was driving somewhere into San Jose, which admittedly is a big city. She said that she didn't give it to him and that she could reach out to him to see what was going on. She never got back to me, and to clarify, she really never did give him my address, but I just got on with my day. I was due to dog sit my Nana's elderly dog. He was a small dog, blind, and pretty deaf. I carried him in the kitchen as any mess would be really easy to clean from the tile. One of my good friends, Sal, joined me at my house, and we joked about watching movies. About an hour into watching Curly the dog, I got a call. It was Ryan. He said he was at Bogany Park, and he was 3 blocks away from my house. I muted my call, and I looked at Sal. She asked if I was okay, and I put my shoes on. I asked him when he got there. He said he'd been there just 5 minutes. As we'd met before, he'd seen my car before, and I was hoping he'd just drive straight through the park and not weave through the neighborhood. I checked on Curly quickly, and then Sal and I took off to the park. I walked the long way to approach from the opposite side of the park from where my house would be, and I saw him. He was just standing there doing backflips and looking around. Sal and I looked at each other, and we approached him slowly. He seemed like he was in a good mood, but I was still on edge. "Hey, so why this park?" was all I said. "Well, you said the drive to Pleasanton was too far, so I thought I'd come to you." I took a moment and I figured that I didn't really want to know how he knew where I lived, so I just shut him down. "Listen, you're sweet, and thank you for coming out this way to, I don't know, say hi, I guess. But this is a bit too much for me." He seemed really unfazed by what I had said, and he told me he drove all the way down here so we could hang out. I told him that if he had messaged me beforehand, I would have told him I'd be busy today. I was dog sitting, and I wouldn't be able to. He said that we could just hang out here, and that I could bring the dog, and that we can just chill here. I told him that wasn't a good idea, and the dog wasn't friendly. He offered for us to get into his car so he could drive us, or at least meet at my place. I knew that there was no more letting him down gently. I looked at him and said, "Look, you drove here some blocks from where I live. I don't know how you found this park, but I'm not interested. The weird kiss, the pushiness, I'm not into it. I'm not gonna get into your car. This is done. Go ahead, complain to Blue or whatever. You're giving me the creeps." At this point, I knew that my temper got the best of me. Sal had gotten into the conversation, and she then pulled me away for us to walk back the way we came. Another adult, a father to one of the kids at the playground, had taken notice of this, and he stopped him from following us. When I finally got home, I locked all of the doors and I blocked him on Snap and deleted his number. I gave Blue a call and I told her what happened. She calmed me down a bit and she told me she was going to block him too. It's now been 3 or 4 years, and I still remember how he tried to turn the whole thing on me. How he had called Blue and she just played along with it before hanging up and blocking him. We still don't know how he got so close to my house. After that, no matter how much I wanted to rebel against my parents, I was always very cautious when it came to dating.
For a while, when I was 16, I was always on Snapchat. I was on there so much it was pretty normal for me to get follows from odd people. People I'd never met, but never like this. It was June 18th of 2015. I was on Snapchat doing what I always do. Everything was pretty normal. Like always, I was scrolling through all my followers, and I came across a username that said, "Look outside your window." It sent chills down my spine. It was also kind of alarming, mainly because seconds later, I heard what sounded like a rock hitting my window. Startled, I tried to shake it off and get back to what I was doing. I began to receive chats from this follower on a regular basis, but I would never respond. I simply didn't know who they were, and they had a creepy enough username. One day he sent me a picture. It was from the outside of someone's house, outside of a window, and it read, "Look familiar?" Instantly I stood up, because that was a window on our house, specifically to my bedroom. I turned slowly to the window, expecting to see someone there. I'd never felt my heart pound so hard before. But when I gazed out the window, I could see no one. I watched out the window for a while, expecting to see someone come out of hiding, but there was no one there. Maybe, I thought, this was just from a house similar to ours. I closed the curtain, and I decided to check the doors before crawling up onto the couch and watching TV. As I sat down, though, I got another message on Snapchat. It was from the same person. I don't know why I opened it. I should have just ignored them from then on. This one read, "You look surprised." It showed a picture of the same window, but from further away. The window now had the curtains drawn, the same curtains I use in my bedroom. That was it. I called my mom. I was crying as I tried to explain to her what was happening. I told her she needed to come home right away. I don't think she fully understood. She sounded irritated and confused, but she knew that this was urgent, so thankfully, she came home early. She took my phone and went through my Snapchat stuff. And right before she could decide what to do, I got a message on my Snapchat again. Immediately, my mother read it. There was no picture this time. It just said, "Do you want me to hurt your mother too?" This was enough to freak me out and get my mom pissed. She ended up reporting it, though there wasn't much to go on. The police would drive by our house every so often for the next few days. It was hard to sleep during that time. Even with the police there, I didn't feel safe. Mom even took some more time off to be with me more often. And luckily, after all of this, I haven't received any more messages or pictures. So long, look outside your window, and I hope I never hear from you again. First of all, I just want to say that if you don't explicitly know someone in real life, do not add them as a friend on any sort of social media. It could either be spam or someone trying to do something terrible to you. Anyway, this year I'd finally gotten on Snapchat. My friends had pressured me to get on it, although I didn't really want to. I just wasn't into the idea of sending or receiving pictures and videos of myself or other people. I'm not the best at presenting myself or the things in my life, and I usually wasn't interested in other people's lives. I was an introvert by definition. Even though I didn't expect it, I was growing kind of fond of the app after using it for a few weeks. I began taking more and more selfies. I think it was helping me not care too much about my appearance or what strangers thought of me. It was really helping me come out of my shell, and I was having a good time. That was until I made a huge screw up. I was fooling around, checking out posts from those I follow, thinking of what I could post next, when I came by a message at the top of my iPhone. It said, "Hannah28 has added you." I quickly rattled my brain, trying to think of someone I knew who was named Hannah, but I couldn't think of anyone. I didn't mind much though, because Hannah28 was a girl, and I loved getting attention from girls. So I checked out her profile and liked what I saw, and I decided to add her as well. And only seconds after, I got a message from her. "Hey you," she said. I replied, "Oh hi, do I know you?" "No," she says. I then proceeded to ask her how old she was. She said 15, which was my age, and this made me smile. And before I could reply to that, she sent me an even better message, saying, "I think you're cute." I smiled even bigger now, until I realized that I haven't posted anything recently, so there was nothing of me on my profile at the moment, and I never sent her any photos. So how could she know what I looked like? I didn't answer. I mean, what should I have answered? I was nervous and confused. I've always been a paranoid person when it comes to who I'm talking to, and especially when it comes to girls. I then received 2 more messages. I didn't dare open them. I was already pretty flustered, and it was getting late, so I headed off to bed. I woke up in the morning to the sound of my phone buzzing repeatedly. It was Hannah28 again. She was blowing up my Snapchat, sending me video after video with no explanation. So, being both curious and weirded out, there was only one thing I could do. I began to play each video. All of these videos were at night. I could barely see anything in most of them. In the first one, she seemed to be walking down a street. She was saying something in a whisper. It wasn't in English, and I didn't know what she was saying. In the second video, her voice was more clear. I could tell she was speaking Spanish. She was still on the street she was walking. It was too dark to make out any details. And finally, in the third video, she was standing on someone's porch, and she was wiggling a very familiar doorknob. The door was locked, and she couldn't get inside. So she filmed herself, scratching the wood of the door with her fingernails that were especially long. At this point, I was in denial. I didn't want to believe what I was seeing, what I was hearing. I did my best to listen to what she was saying in Spanish as she wiggled the doorknob. I went over to Google Translate and typed in what I'd heard, and I got a rough yet accurate enough translation. And then I knew exactly what she had been repeating in every single video. Let me in, let me in, let me in. You see, the door she was at was my door. She had come to my house. She had tried to get inside. This creepy stranger was only a few meters away from me at one point, while I was unconscious in bed. My heart pounded like it was going to explode. Right away, I went on my Snapchat and blocked this crazy person, and I tried to forget everything that had happened. But when I saw the scratching at the door, I couldn't help but tell my parents. Unfortunately, I had gotten rid of any trace of Hannah28 on Snapchat, so I was unable to show them what I was talking about. At the very most, they thought it was weird, because I had no evidence to back up what I was saying. If only I'd kept those videos, I could have told my parents to call the cops. Well, my week went by without any more weird happenings, and I couldn't be happier. But just a few weeks ago, I got a new notification on my Snapchat account, and I'm sure you can guess what it said. Hannah29 has added you. My friend has always had experiences with strange or paranormal happenings ever since she was born, so this kind of stuff isn't uncommon for her, but it's still pretty scary. One day, my friend had friends over at her house. I should mention it's a big deal because they don't like coming over, because the house is unsettling to them. I can't say I blame them. Well, when they got there, they were having a good time. And at one point she was doing a silly Snapchat with her friends. And of course, that's when things got weird. She decided to play back the video to watch it when she heard a deep voice in the playback say,
Get
"Get out." After they heard that, she and her friends were so creeped out that they exited the house. She decided to go ahead and post it to her Snapchat to see if anyone who listened to it could hear it as well. And apparently they could. She was glad she wasn't the only one, but she was still having a panic attack about it. She must have been some miracle worker, because she convinced her friends to stay and to just try to forget about it. And for a while it worked, until they fell asleep. It didn't last long before they all shot up at the same time, and they all began to freak out simultaneously. Once they calmed down and could actually breathe, my friend asked them if they had seen it too. Because apparently they had all seen an old man. He walked into the room after slowly opening the bedroom door and yelled at them in an earth-shaking voice to get out of his house. Needless to say, she had to wake up her mom to call the other friend's parents. They didn't want to stay there any longer. By 2 in the morning, they were gone, but her mom thankfully believed her stories, especially after she showed the video to her. To this day, myself including. Nobody at school goes near her house. The stories have spread since then, and everyone knows not to go there or to even get close, because at her house, you're never alone.
Like everyone else, the last few years have been hard. In early 2020, I lost my grandma to pneumonia, and it wouldn't be long before my aunt got sick too and came very close to death herself. It was a lot for a guy my age to handle, but I knew once it was over, I'd be able to see my Faith again. Now, Faith and I had met in middle school and quickly fell in love. Our homes were too far apart to see one another very often. Her parents were also super traditional and didn't want her having a boyfriend. Besides school, our only constant form of contact was the telephone. We'd often talk all night and go straight into school without a second of sleep. And in spite of all the odds, we stayed together. The biggest test of our relationship would be high school. Faith's dad bought a new house even further away. That put Faith into a different school district. Now we would see each other even less. And I was sure this meant the end of our relationship, but Faith refused to give up. By now, we both had computers in our rooms, and we were able to talk and see each other over the internet with webcams. Every day we'd race home from school and talk until early into the next morning. I'd do all my homework during school time so it wouldn't get in the way. Faith did the same, and for the next 3 or so years, this would be our prime avenue of communication. I think we were only able to meet face-to-face a handful of times, and it was hard on both of us. I lost hope more than once, but Faith always lived up to her name and brought me back from the edges of darkness every time. Strangely, despite all the personal sadness that I experienced during the height of the pandemic, Faith and I thrived. Being quarantined worked great for our particular situation. Other than a few hours of school garbage every day, we got to talk uninterrupted all day and night. Even so, not seeing her in person for so long weighed on me. I was doubting our future together, as I had so many times before. Luckily, by then, the lockdowns had lifted. Her father would be returning to work, but school remained online. This was the perfect chance for us to be alone together, and I was going to take it. I brought this up with my brother, and he agreed to loan me his car to go see her. A week later, our opportunity arrived. I drove the 35 miles to her house. She rushed me inside and closed the door, and we held one another tightly for a long time. The energy was a bit weird between us, but we overcame it pretty quickly. We rushed off to her room for a little personal time, and I'd forgotten how great being with her was. Unfortunately, our time together was about to be cut short. I had just left her room. Faith was making us a snack when her dad walked in, and he began yelling at me instantly. Things like, "Where is my daughter? What did you do to my little girl?" Faith ran into the room and tried to calm him down, and it didn't help. In his defense, he'd never actually met me. Crazy, I know, considering we'd been together for so long, but our relationship hadn't exactly been normal. We tried to explain the situation, but her dad was just too angry to listen. He looked at Faith and I real closely and sneered, and this would be the point when everything came off the rails. "What have you two been up to?" His expression was so terrifying I didn't dare speak, and he looked back and forth at each of us, but we stayed quiet. "Answer me now. Did you put hands on my little girl?" I remember him saying. Now Faith's dad looked at her and asked her if I'd forced myself on her, and she, acting instinctively, blurted out, "No." We loved each other, and we'd been together since 7th grade. He knew what that meant, and I knew exactly what his expression meant. He gritted his teeth and lunged at me, and he was too fast for me. I was overwhelmed by his size and power, and he grabbed me around the throat with one hand and lifted me off the ground. I was barely able to breathe or swallow. I tried to speak, but he told me to shut up and listen. "I don't care if you two met in kindergarten. You're gonna leave here this second and never contact my little girl again. If I ever see you here again, I won't hesitate to kill you." And with that, he let me drop to the floor and shouted at the top of his lungs to get out. He didn't have to repeat himself. I was already out the door before he finished yelling. I started the car and sped away. I was already several miles down the road before I slowed down. I was shaking so badly I could barely keep hold of the wheel. The notifications were going off on my phone, but I didn't care. Odds were high that it was Faith, and I was way too shaken to talk to anyone, especially her. Now back at home, I locked myself in my room and tried to calm down. A few hours passed before I got the courage to check my phone, and just as I suspected, Faith had texted and called me at least 5 times since I'd left. I wasn't sure what to do. I talked to my brother about it, and he suggested that I sleep on it before deciding. It was hard, but I did get to sleep at around 3 a.m. When I awoke the next morning, my mind wasn't any clearer. In fact, now that I had time to rest, I was even more traumatized by what had occurred. I couldn't get Faith's dad's angry face out of my head. I honestly believed that he really would kill me if I gave him the chance. I remain in this cycle of indecision to this day. It's almost been 3 years since I've communicated with Faith, and I'm still unsure if I ever will. She still sends me texts from time to time, and I read them. It's hard to be out of contact after all the years we've been together, but as long as she lives at home, I'm not willing to risk my life for my family's. I looked into the eyes of evil that day, and I'll never forget it. Faith, if you do hear this or read this, I love you, and always will. But your father's a monster. I suggest you get away from him as soon as possible. And until then, we'll be doomed to be apart. One heart, forever broken in two. I was around 15 when my dad got a job with the railroad. Now before then, he was an over-the-road truck driver. This job kept him away from home during the week, and Mom and I were lonely a lot, but the money was just too good to turn down. The two of us got used to dealing with things on our own. I learned to cook and do my own laundry during this time. This skill would serve me well later. Neither of my roommates in my first apartment had any clue how to do really anything, and it would be an eye-opening experience and made me appreciate my mom that much more. Maybe we can discuss that sometime later, though. Today, I want to tell everyone about something that happened to me during that time of learning. This was when I was about 12. I woke up for school as usual, but quickly realized that I was sick. Now, to keep this PG-rated, I had stuff spewing out of both ends, if you get my meaning. I tried to be an adult about it, but I fainted in front of my mom and she put me to bed. Although not ideal, I was happy to have the day off from school. I was given a bunch of different medications and quickly passed out. I woke up once or twice to go to the bathroom, but I slept for most of the day otherwise. And just after 2 p.m., though, I awoke refreshed and feeling great. The sick feeling was completely gone, but now I was starving. My first instinct was to run into the kitchen and gorge myself. I decided that that was probably a bad idea. Instead, I took a page from my mom's book and tried some saltines. I'd had good luck with those in the past, and I also grabbed a Sprite while I was there and brought them back to my room. I was close to the bathroom if things went wrong. I had 9 or 10 crackers and half a glass of Sprite, and I waited 30 minutes to see if I'd barf them up. Nothing bad happened, but now I was even hungrier. I thought for a minute before choosing ramen as the safest option. I finished off the bottle of Sprite and made for the kitchen. My mom would be home soon, and under normal circumstances, I would have just waited for her to arrive, but I was so ravenous I couldn't wait any longer. I made ramen for myself several times. I filled the pot and eagerly watched in hopes that the water would boil quicker. It didn't. When the moment finally arrived, I broke up the noodles and added them to the water. A minute later, I poured the flavor packet in. I impatiently stirred until the noodles softened just enough to be edible. I was done waiting. Now, the events that followed were likely due to dehydration and overall weakness. I looked around for a pot holder but saw none. There was a hand towel nearby, though, so I grabbed for that. And the premise was the same. I couldn't see any problems. However, today was not a usual day. I lifted the pot and set it on the counter, like I normally do. As I set the towel aside, I realized that it was on fire. I snatched it back up and tossed it into the sink behind me. My hand was slightly burned in the process. The time I wasted worrying about my hand allowed the fire enough time to jump onto the curtains. From this point, I was always a step behind. The water from the faucet extinguished the flames quickly. My split second of satisfaction was destroyed once I noticed the burning curtains above the sink. Having one of those sprayers in my sink would have been perfect for this, but we didn't have one. I attempted to splash water from my hands. It was useless, though. The curtains were already consumed, and the fire had now taken hold on the ceiling and the adjoining cabinet. I was so overwhelmed and incapable of coming up with any remedy now. When the fire alarm went off, I gave up and ran out of the house. I opened the front door and ran directly into my mother. She was very calm, and all I could say was fire, kitchen. She didn't miss a step after that. To my amazement, she entered the kitchen and opened the door under the sink. Flames were covering the ceiling now. A few came unnervingly close to her, and like a magician pulling a rabbit out of a hat, she withdrew a massive fire extinguisher from under the sink and pointed it at the ceiling. And within seconds, most of the flames on the ceiling were gone. From there, she backtracked to the cabinets and put the flames there out. If I had to guess, I'd say she had the fire completely extinguished in less than 30 seconds. It remains the single most amazing thing I've seen to this day. Mom ran over to check on me. It took a few seconds for me to regain my senses, but once I did, I broke down and cried. I was so relieved I couldn't speak. My mom got out the first aid kit and put some cream on my hands, and the weight of my actions began to dawn on me. I started apologizing over and over, and this made me cry again. Mom calmed me down and assured me that it wasn't a big deal. I couldn't see how it wasn't, but I'd have to rely on her judgment. Some time passed and we discussed what had happened. I expected her to scream at me any second, but she never did. After the excitement had passed, we walked into the kitchen to get a look at the damage. I sheepishly asked her what was going to happen, and her answer caught me completely off guard. "Don't worry about it. I only care that you're safe. I'll tell your dad it's my fault. He may grumble a little, but what's done is done." I could feel the weight lift off my shoulders in real time. Rather than cry, like I wanted to do, I grabbed my mother as tight as possible and held her for a long time. And that's basically how everything occurred that day. After our little family moment ended, Mom and I cleaned up as much as we could. There wasn't really a lot we could do at the time. Dad would have to replace the cabinet before the painting was done. I recall that he wasn't as upset as we had expected. He simply asked if Mom and I were okay and let out a big sigh. A few weeks later, he came home with the cabinet and some cans of paint, and by the following week, the kitchen was looking as good as new. I'm still amazed at how quickly things can go from life-threatening to no big deal. Life's just kind of funny like that.
I'm from Nashville, Tennessee. Before I continue with this next part, I want to go ahead and say that I deeply regret doing the things I did when I was younger, and I don't condone breaking the law or doing the kind of things that I did back then. But anyways, I used to break into people's houses or garages, and I would steal whatever I could find for food money, or really whatever I wanted to spend it on. I should also mention that I lived in a very bad part of Nashville, by the way. But I would stay with my grandparents, who had custody of my older brother on the weekends. Well, this particular weekend, when I was about 13, I was going through some people's backyards looking for unlocked cars or garages. Well, I happened to notice a back door was open, about 4 or 5 inches with no lights on anywhere downstairs. So, being the 13-year-old kid that I was, I go into the house, and while tiptoeing through the house trying to steal stuff like TVs and game systems, as well as computers, I heard a high-pitched scream, but it was muffled, if you can understand what I'm saying. Well, that stopped me dead in my tracks and caused me to listen way more intently. After the muffled scream, I had heard a slap and what sounded like someone then telling them, "Don't bother screaming, because nobody can hear you screaming down here." So I slowly started walking towards the screams, and I found a door cracked open that led to the basement, and I could tell there was a light on in the basement. I end up laying on the floor and looking down the steps towards the center of the basement, and I see that a man and a woman are tied up to some chairs in the basement, and both are gagged. The difference was that the man had his head hanging limp, and he had blood all over his chest, and he didn't even look like he was breathing. When I saw this, I got really scared, and then I took off running, making all kinds of noise. I know that it was loud enough for the intruder downstairs to hear me and freak out and start running up after me, but I just ran as fast as possible out the front door. I didn't even bother unlocking the screen door. I just ran right through it and ran down to the corner house, who I knew the owner was a firefighter. I start beating on his door, screaming for help, that there's a man chasing me trying to kill me, like he did the neighbor. Well, this really freaked out the homeowner, and it caused him to pull out a weapon on me first, until he noticed the deranged man running behind me at full speed, who had a machete in one hand and a kitchen knife in the other. Without saying a word, the fireman opened fire and he shot the guy in his leg, which caused him to fall, and it also caused the kitchen knife to go right through his own neck. I believe that actually killed him on sight. I never heard him make any noises, but I was making enough for myself at the moment. The fireman called the police before heading towards the neighbor's house that the man came from, and he then found the wife barely clinging to her own life. But unfortunately, the husband was pronounced dead on the scene. What I heard around the neighborhood afterwards was that the husband had been in a car accident about 6 months before this, and the said crazy man's wife had apparently died in that car wreck. This caused the man to go crazy and start drinking and doing drugs until he just didn't care about living, and he just wanted everyone to suffer like he and his wife had. So he went to the man's house and he tortured him and his wife for hours until he passed out from the pain. The intruder slit the husband's throat, and before chasing me, he slit the wife's throat as well. But luckily, the paramedics were able to save her when they arrived. So yeah, kids, don't break into other people's homes. You just might stumble onto something that you can't get out of. I'm a 19-year-old female, but this happened when I was 14. My family went to my aunt and uncle's house for some reason. I didn't want to go, so my parents let me stay home by myself. They said they were only going to be gone for a few hours, but at about 10 p.m., my dad called me. "Hey Ashlyn, we're going to be staying the night at your aunt and uncle's place. I love you. Good night." I didn't even have time to say anything before he hung up on the phone. I got frustrated because I didn't feel comfortable staying home alone then. I started to boil some water and make some ramen. When I was about to put the ramen in the water, I had heard the doorbell ring. I went to go look out the window and the door, but no one was there. For some context, the window has one of those half-circle ones at the top of the door. Anyway, I went back to tending the ramen when the doorbell rang again. I went to look again, but there was still no one there. My ramen was now done by this point, and I went to go sit on the couch to eat it. Once I was done and about to put the bowl in the sink, I had heard one of the basement windows then break. It was one of those windows that were very small and close to the ground. I just ran to my room at that point and I locked the door. After like 10 minutes, I slowly opened the door and there was nothing there. I went over to the basement door, which was right down the hall. I gathered all the courage to open up the door. It was really so dark down there, so I'd flicked the light above the stairs on. But what I saw next was absolutely disturbing. On the bottom step, there was a man there. He looked to be homeless. He was extremely skinny, like he hadn't even eaten in weeks. He was also smiling from ear to ear, holding a knife to his side. I just slammed the door and ran back to my room. I had a bit of a problem here. I left my phone on the coffee table in the living room, so I couldn't call the police. I then heard the basement door open. I just dove under my bed as I heard his footsteps getting closer. I heard my doorknob start to jiggle and shake. Then, I heard a small maniacal laugh. I got out from under the bed and started to open the window, and he then started banging on the door. I got the window open and jumped out. I ran to my neighbor's house and they let me in to call the police. They arrived in 5 minutes and searched the house, while another cop started talking to me about the incident. They eventually found the man, and they brought him out in cuffs. They told me they found him hiding in my closet. I was terrified at this. I went in to grab some essentials, and I asked them to take me to my aunt and uncle's house. They did, and once we got there, I then told my parents everything that happened. It made me so scared to think that he was waiting for me to come back. I developed severe paranoia, and I had to start going to therapy in 2019 for this. Luckily, I'm doing better now, and last I heard about the man, he was still locked up, probably for something else. I was told he's going to be sent to a mental facility on July 21st, 2022, and I really do hope that he gets the help he needs. This happened about 3 weeks ago. It was roughly about 3:30 in the morning, and I was watching some YouTube videos. I saw my dog's ears perk up, and he walked to the back door. I figured he needed to use the restroom, so I went to let him out. When I made it over to the door, I unlocked it, and I was about to open the door, when something then told me to click the light on first. When I did so, I then saw something quickly flash behind the side of my house. I felt uneasy, but I opened the door and let the dog out. He immediately bolted to the side that I saw the flash, and then disappeared into the dark. I then grabbed my dad's 12-gauge shotgun that we keep hidden by the back door for emergencies. I grabbed my spotlight and looked around, but I couldn't really see from the porch. I closed the door and I stepped off the porch, calling my dog's name. Eventually he came running back to me, and I took him back into the house. But when I reached the door, I saw that it was cracked open. This frightened me, mostly because I was alone for the weekend, and I know I closed the door. As I approached the back door, gun in hand, I saw a light moving around in my house. I put my dog on his chain, and then slowly moved into the house. When I got into the room where the light was coming from, which was my sister's room, I slowly and quietly nudged the door open with my barrel. And when I turned on the light, I saw a large man wielding one of my knives from my bedroom. I told the man to drop the knife and get the fuck out of my house before I shoot him. He promptly dropped my knife, and he then proceeded to jump out of my sister's window like this was some kind of action movie or something. I fired 3 shots into the air as he ran away. I don't know who this man was or what he had planned, but whoever he was, if he happens to return, the next time, there will not be a warning. Hi, my name is Andrews, and I live in southern India. This just happened to me a couple of nights ago, and it's still really fresh in my mind. It was 30 minutes past 11 p.m., I believe. I was lying in my bed listening to Southern Cannibal to go to sleep, since I have amnesia, and imagining stories by listening to them makes me sleep much faster. Suddenly, I saw a beam of torchlight entering through my window from the back of my bed. At first, I thought it was just the security guard who guards my little secluded village, but that beam of light was persistent. This went on for 3 more minutes or so, with every window passing a considerable amount of torchlight to see as well. After the final window in my house passed a light, it was, well, gone. I thought it was strange, but I kept listening to the stories. After a while, I had heard the sounds of footsteps approaching my door, since I was now in the hall trying to sleep on the couch. I paused the story, and I had then looked out through a large vertical window facing the outside of my house. I dropped my AirPods case in shock, as I then saw a man wearing a kerchief around his mouth trying to do something with the lock. I then heard the sound of my lock turning. Stupidly, I hid under my couch to call 100, which is the number to call the police in India. The man then entered my house and started looking around the house. The operator then said that it would take the police from the nearest police outpost at least 10 minutes minimum to arrive in my house. He went into my bedroom, taking all the money I had as a broke college student, as I later found out after the cops arrived. He went around looking in the kitchen, and he actually took a piece of cake from the fridge, which I bought for my birthday. After that, he just left. I didn't go out to check if he had gone yet, because I saw him holding some sort of weapon, which I believe was a pipe. After what felt like an hour, but only 5 minutes, the cops arrived. The policeman arrived and announced their presence. I yelled from behind the couch, telling them that I was the one who called them. I then came out and they questioned me. What they said next sent chills down my spine. An old man who lived a couple houses down from the neighborhood actually called the cops, saying the same thing as I did. There was one key difference between him and me though. He was dead and I was alive. He was apparently bludgeoned with the supposed pipe that the thief was holding, and there was blood everywhere. The thief must have inspected the windows to see if anyone was in my home, and I guess after checking it out, he thought that no one was home and broke in. Needless to say, I didn't get any sleep that night, and I also got nightmares for the next few days, thinking of what would have happened if I hadn't paid attention to the lights and I was still in my bed, or if I was listening to those stories with high volume. The police said they'd look into the case more and keep me updated. To this day, I've received no updates, and I'm still very afraid that that murderous psycho of a thief is still out there. I know everybody says this, and it's very cliche, but stay safe out there. Always lock your doors and windows. Back in September, I moved out of my parents' place and into my own new townhouse. It wasn't anything extravagant, but it was mine, and it immediately started feeling like home. I live in a quiet neighborhood where basically there's no crime, and everyone keeps to themselves. At the time this story took place, I lived completely alone. I wasn't really sure what to make of it, and I still have more questions than answers. Everything was going really great in my new place for about a week. That was until one night, at about 3 a.m., I was home alone asleep, when I then awoke to the sound of my doorbell ringing. I thought for a moment that I might have just dreamed it, but my fears were confirmed when I then heard the doorbell chime once again. Surely no one ringing my doorbell at 3 a.m. had good intentions. My bedroom is on the second floor and looked straight down to the front steps. I sat, trying to will up enough courage to look outside. I eventually felt confident enough to look, but to my surprise, there was no one there. I honestly wasn't sure whether this made things better or if it just made the whole thing even more unnerving. I eventually calmed down and then slept for the rest of the night. I later on checked outside in the morning, but I didn't see anything. I went on with my day and just forgot about the whole thing. Fast forward a few weeks, and the same thing happens again. Once again at around 3 a.m. A feeling of dread filled my body as I sat bolt upright in bed. I could feel my own heart beating in my throat. I cautiously peered through my curtains, and again, no one was there. This was just not making any sense. My doorbell never rang on its own during the day, and it was way too high for any animal to reach it. This occurred several more times in the coming weeks. It was always in the middle of the night around 3 a.m., as though it were planned. One day though, it just stopped altogether, and it hasn't happened again. I am relieved that this eerie and unnerving incident no longer occurs, but I still often wonder why this happened. Had it not always happened around the same time, it might have had a better explanation, but I have no good reason for why this happened. This has since stopped though, and I'm thankful. I'll be sure to provide an update if anything starts to happen again.
I was walking home from the mall on Valentine's Day, feeling pretty good about my day of shopping and indulging in some much-needed me time. The sun was starting to set and the sky was a beautiful shade of pink and orange, so I decided to take the long way home to enjoy the peacefulness of the quiet streets and the beauty of the sky above me. I was 25 and excited to be starting a new job at the coffee shop next to my apartment. I had finally moved out of my parents' house and was beginning to feel like my life was going in the direction I wanted it to. I was listening to music through my earbuds, but had this nerve-wracking feeling that something was just off. It's like I could feel someone watching me. Almost like an invisible set of eyes were just locked directly to my every move. My heart began to race and my breathing became shallow as I quickened my pace, and I was desperate just to get home. I looked over my shoulder and, of course, there he was. My ex. The one who couldn't get over me and just wouldn't leave me alone. After we broke up almost a year before this, he did everything he could to convince me to take him back. At first, it was normal stuff like having flowers sent to my home or mailing me sweet letters in the mail. It was romantic and nice and kind of innocent even, but I didn't want to get back together with him, so I never responded to any of it. At this point, I hadn't seen or heard from him for a couple of months, and I thought that he had finally gotten the hint that it was over between us, but apparently not. He was walking about 10 feet behind me, and when I looked back at him, I could see this sort of sinister look in his eyes. He had always been a bit creepy, but this was some next-level stuff. He didn't say a word. He just sort of smiled this horribly disturbing smile. I tried to ignore him and keep walking, but he started following me more closely, getting closer and closer with each step. I turned a corner, hoping to lose him, but he was still there, and every step that I took, he took the same one, only 5 feet behind me. I started to feel my panic set in. I'd always felt safe walking home alone, but now I felt like I was being hunted or stalked like someone's prey. I pulled out my phone, calling a friend, but she didn't answer. I tried calling my roommate, but still no answer. I was completely alone with no one to help me. I had called the police on him many times before, and the last time they just straight up told me not to call again about him unless it was a life or death situation, and I really didn't want to hear about that again. So I started to run, hoping to get to my apartment building before he caught up with me. I could hear him getting closer and closer with every step, and so close that I could even hear his heavy breathing. I was gasping for air and my heart was pounding in my chest, but I knew that I had to keep running. I finally made it to my building and ran inside, but he caught the door and followed me in. I could hear his footsteps echoing down the hall as I ran to my apartment and locked the door behind me once I was safely inside. I was okay. I wanted to scream and cry at the same time, but it wasn't over yet. I tried to calm myself down, but my mind was just racing. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to call the police. I didn't want to make a scene, and I didn't want to draw attention to myself. I just wanted it to all be over. I wanted my ex to be one of those guys that just moves on when a relationship ends. My roommate found me curled up in a ball in front of the door and asked me what happened. Through tears and hyperventilation, I told her everything. She was horrified and told me that she didn't care what they said the last time that I had called and that she was calling the police, because being chased home by your psycho stalker ex is in fact life or death. Just as she got a hold of the dispatcher, we heard a noise outside the door. I froze, my heart racing. My roommate and I stared at each other with wide eyes, waiting, listening for any noise coming from outside my door. Was he trying to get inside? I grabbed a knife from the kitchen just in case. The noise stopped and I started to relax a little. My roommate was explaining everything to the dispatcher when suddenly it started again. This time it was louder. It was a loud banging noise, but the banging wasn't coming from the door. It was almost like he was stomping around outside the door, having a tantrum that he wasn't able to get inside. I'd never experienced that side of him, and I never knew that he was capable of doing something like this. Throughout our whole relationship, he seemed so normal. The reason we broke up was because he had cheated, and I felt like if he was willing to risk our whole relationship for one night with a random woman, then our relationship didn't mean much to him to begin with. You'd think that he would have been able to move on by the time this all happened. I crept up to the door, knife in hand, and peered through the peephole. I couldn't see anyone, but I could hear someone breathing. It sounded like his mouth was pressed against the door like he wanted to hear it. I started to panic again, but my roommate tried her best to calm me down. The police told us to stay inside and keep the door locked until they arrived. They said it would only take around 10 minutes for them to get there. We sat on the floor and waited for the police. All the while, I could hear him still breathing on the other side of the door, and I knew that all he wanted was to get inside and do God knows what to me. Finally, the police got there, and they arrested my ex. He didn't put up a fight and went with them willingly. They took him away, and I was finally able to sort of breathe a sigh of relief, but unfortunately, this sort of fear and panic would stay with me for quite a long time. No matter how much I wanted to or how convenient it would be, I could never get myself to walk home alone again. I never forgot the feeling of being followed and hunted by someone who had supposedly loved me before. I was lucky to make it out alive, but the thought of what could have happened is something I still think about almost every day. I never thought that someone I once loved could turn into a monster. It's important to always trust your instincts. I learned that the hard way, and I hope that my story can serve as a warning to others. It serves as a reminder that sometimes love can just turn into an obsession, and that obsession can turn into something much more dangerous. I was so excited to start a new life in the city. My girlfriend and I had just moved into a small apartment, and I was eager to explore a place that I'd never been before. I'd gone to the grocery store to pick up a few things, and as I was walking home, I was texting my girlfriend about all the cool things I came across on the walk and all the fun stuff that there was for us to do together around the city. I was so preoccupied with my phone that I didn't even realize that I'd gotten turned around. I don't know how I was stupid enough to not look where I was going, but I was just really excited to tell her about my day and everything I saw. After a while, I finally looked up and realized that I had no idea where I was. The streets were empty and the buildings appeared to look abandoned with their doors and windows boarded up. It kind of looked like something out of an apocalyptic video game, The Last of Us. I was starting to feel uneasy and honestly a little scared. This looked like nothing of the area that I was just walking in not too long ago. I looked at my phone's map and started making my way back in the right direction. I was around 4 miles from home still, and it was getting dark. As I was walking, I saw an old car with a taxi sign on top. It was starting to rain and the darkness was engulfing the streets around me, but I still hesitated for a second before getting in. It didn't look like an official taxi, and I'd seen way too many true crime shows to trust it, but I just wanted to get home, and the thought of being lost in this unfamiliar place was freaking me out way more than getting in the car. I knocked on the window, and the driver rolled it down just a little crack, and it was enough for me to ask if he was able to take me where I needed to go. He didn't speak, just nodded a yes in my direction. He unlocked the doors, and I got in and told him to drop me off at the gas station near my apartment building, and I gave him the address. The driver started the engine, and we were off. I still had my Maps app open and glanced at it every so often to make sure that we were going in the right direction. Only the further we drove, I noticed that we had started going in the opposite direction of my apartment. I started to get nervous and asked the driver if he could take me home or even just let me out so I could find another ride, but he didn't say a word, and instead just kept driving. I started to feel panic set in as the car took me further away from my home. I demanded that the driver let me out, and he just sort of chuckled to himself. I tried to open the door, but it was locked and didn't have a button to unlock it. It was one of those locks where when the car is locked, it retracts into the door and you can't pull it up to unlock it. And I was trapped. I started to feel a cold sweat on my skin as the fear that I was feeling began to fill every inch of my body. The driver drove for what felt like forever, taking me deeper into the outskirts of the city down its darkest, deserted streets. In reality, we probably only drove for around 30 minutes, but the panic and fear that I was feeling in that car made every second feel like hours. The rain was coming down harder and harder, and I could feel the driver's eyes on me through the rearview mirror. He was watching me closely, and it was making me even more afraid. I was trapped in that taxi with a stranger who seemed to have no intention of letting me go. The fear and desperation was overwhelming, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't think of a way out. Eventually, the taxi pulled off to the side of the road, and the driver turned to look at me. He was wearing a black hoodie and his face was littered with the trashiest tattoos I'd ever seen. I almost wanted to laugh for a second and remembered where I was and decided that wouldn't be the best idea. I could see a sort of creepy smirk on his face as he spoke to me in a harsh voice. "Welcome to your final destination," he said, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I didn't know what to do. I tried to reason with the driver to just let me go and there'd be no harm done, but he wouldn't listen. He just laughed as he got out of the car and walked towards the back door. I didn't even know what to think. I had no idea what he was going to do with me. The driver opened the back door and dragged me out of the car by my jacket. He threw me into the gutter, and I hit the ground hard. I was in pain, but I was still alive. I tried to get up and run, but he was fast and caught me, tackling me to the ground. He put a knife to my throat, and I was on the verge of tears, and I tried to scream, but nothing came out. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, my voice shaking, and the driver just laughed, saying, "Why not?" I was terrified and I couldn't move. I could feel the cold metal of the knife against my skin. Finally, I was able to muster up a scream loud enough that somehow a group of people nearby were able to hear it. I heard footsteps coming from down the street and thank God that they were getting closer. The man told me to shut up and press the knife harder against my skin. And just when I thought things were over for me, I heard a voice calling out in the distance. "Hey, what's going on here?" I looked down the street and only about 50 feet away, a group of people were walking towards us. They were watching us and I realized that the driver was beginning to get nervous. His hands began to shake and he got off of me as fast as he could. He turned and ran away on foot, just leaving his car and me laying there on the street, reeling from what had just happened. The group ran towards me and one of the guys helped me up and put pressure on the wound that I didn't even notice that I had on my neck. They called the police and an ambulance took me to the hospital. I needed a few stitches for the laceration on my throat, but was otherwise physically okay. The police searched the vehicle and realized that it was stolen and there was nothing in it to tie it to the person who had done that to me that night. Now, years later, another man was abducted in the same manner in that area, only this time, the man was caught and he was arrested. I was called in due to the correlation in the crime and was able to identify the man as the man who attacked me on that night, and thank God that he was charged and sentenced to 7 years in prison. He never admitted to kidnapping anyone else, but we knew that was probably not true. I tried my best to get over it, but the emotional scars will always be there, along with the physical one on my neck. I'm so grateful to the people who saved me. I'll never forget the fear and desperation that I felt in that taxi, but I'll also never forget the kindness and bravery of the strangers who risked their lives to help me and make sure that I was okay. From that day on, I made sure to always pay attention to my surroundings and never let my guard down again.
It was back in the summer of 1974, and I was 16 years old at the time. I had just attended a concert in the city with my friends Dave and John. The three of us were catching a train home. We had got off at our stop, and we began walking home down the main road, chatting about the concert and still buzzing from the cool vibes. It was around 12 a.m. and we were crossing at a main intersection. There wasn't much traffic around this time of night, and as we crossed the road, we suddenly noticed a beat-up brown-colored station wagon stop in the middle of the intersection right near us. His window was down and the driver was around 25 to 30 years old, and although he looked a little dodgy, we just assumed he was going to ask for directions, and so we just stood there waiting to see what this guy wanted, completely unaware of the sheer terror that was about to follow. In that very moment, the guy pulled out a pistol from his lap, and what he uttered next still gives me shivers to this day. He said in a calm tone,
"Who wants it first?"
We just froze in absolute shock and terror, and it took a few seconds for all the reality of this to finally sink in. We didn't even have time to exchange a look, and we all hightailed it across the intersection. As our footsteps thundered across the road, the sound of gunshots filled the air as we ran for those bushes. I was absolutely terrified, waiting for that bullet to hit me or one of my friends in the back. As we ran further into the park and mustered up the courage to look back, we could no longer see the car and breathed a sigh of relief. We all just stood there trying to get our breath back. Luckily, we all knew the area pretty well, and we decided to continue along the old gravel road that we knew would take us back towards our homes. As we walked down the path, our conversation was pretty minimal, as we were too preoccupied of the thoughts of what had just happened and how lucky we were. However, that feeling of relief didn't last very long. As we got near the end of the gravel road, I could make out a car at the very end, and I started to wonder to myself, could that be the guy? We kept walking, but then just like out of a scary movie, the car flicked on its headlights and started revving its engine, and under the dim lights of the street, my heart began to sink as I then realized it was the brown station wagon. We knew he could see us. He was waiting for us, taunting us. He must know these streets well and where each of the different roads would lead. Well, we didn't waste another second. We took off once again and jumped the fence of a neighboring house. We didn't stop. We just kept running and jumping all of the fences. I glanced toward the road many times and I would see his car screaming past. Each time we made it to a main road, we would see his car appear again and once again speed towards us, and we dove over fences and tried to find another way. This happened about 2 or 3 more times after that. Around 1:30 a.m., we got down the end of another side road, and we couldn't see at the time, but the fence we jumped was covered in barbed wire, and it tore our clothes as we slid down. I let out a few groans as it grazed my arm. We were now in some kind of paddock-type area, and we could faintly hear the screeches of his tires racing around trying to find us. We just stood there crouching in the dark, breathing heavily, standing in cow manner, but we didn't care. We probably crouched for about 15 minutes or so, just waiting in the dark. Figuring by now he must be gone, we made our way back onto the main road. We kept our eyes peeled and kept glancing over our shoulders, and as the headlights appeared in the distance on many occasions, we each stopped breathing for a second, wondering in anticipation whether or not it was going to be the brown station wagon. We didn't see him again after that, and around 3 a.m. we walked my friend John home. Dave came back to mind for a bit so we could talk more calmly about our experience. Dave went home later that night. What was only meant to be a 20-minute walk home turned into a 2-hour terror trip that I will never forget. What was even more scary was a week or so later, I heard on the news that an elderly lady was shot by a random stranger one late night not too far from where this happened. Whether it was the same guy or not, I'll never know. All I really know is that my friends and I were incredibly lucky to escape that night. I live in a relatively safe area in Scotland, though I've had several really odd and scary experiences since I moved here about 4 years ago. I'm a short 29-year-old woman and I work in a pub, so I often get out of work quite late. I never wear my headphones when headed home at night, so this particular night was no different than usual. Alarm set, doors locked and checked, then said goodbye to my colleague and then went our separate ways to get home. I usually cross a grocery store car park to get home, and that night something struck me as odd. There were a couple of cars parked there, which is normal, but something just felt off this time. I looked over my shoulder and I clocked a guy in a hat walking a distance behind me. This wasn't weird, but I decided to keep an eye on him nonetheless. I exited the car park to the main road that I lived off of, but still had a good mile or so to go before I finally reached my flat. I checked over my shoulder again, and sure enough, the guy was walking in the same direction as me. The distance between us was starting to close, so I decided to cross the road. Looking over my shoulder, I was able to not only look for traffic coming, but I was also able to keep an eye on him. I crossed the road and didn't bother to look back for another few minutes, assuming he had stayed on the other side. But I began to hear footsteps approaching. I glanced over my shoulder and saw this guy was about 20 feet behind me. I had a soft drink in a glass bottle in my bag, and figuring I was overacting but better safe than sorry, I stuck my hand into my bag and gripped the bottle. Another 45 seconds and this guy was close enough to touch me, but he slows to my pace and then says,
"Hello there, how are you?"
I ignored him and I don't respond. I long ago gave up on pretenses of being polite if I feel uncomfortable. If I'm feeling uncomfortable, I really don't care about a stranger's feelings. But he persists in talking to me.
Hi there, are you going to work today?
No. I was being short with him.
Are you going home?
Yes, I said coldly. Do you live in this direction? I just looked at him, and he tried again.
Do you live off this road? Where do you live? Do you live close by?
I don't respond to him, and I slowed my pace, letting him walk on. I was still gripping the glass bottle, ready to hit him with it should he try anything. He tried to slow down so that I would catch up with him, but I slowed down so much that I was barely walking. He was maybe 300 yards away at this point and simply stopped and turned around, watching me and waiting for me to catch up with him. I reached into my pocket with my free hand and tried to get my phone. Of course, my phone was dead. I figured it would last the walk home, but the dodgy battery had other ideas. Surprisingly though, I wasn't really afraid. He had started walking again, but again, still quite slowly. He looked over his shoulder again after another minute, and I seized the opportunity. There was a path to a block of flats that was obscured by tall hedges, so I leaped behind them. I waited for nearly 10 minutes, never letting go of that bottle the whole time. I peeked around the hedges to make sure he was there. I peeked behind bins and bus stops to make sure he wasn't hiding, but as far as I could tell, I had lost him. Maybe he didn't mean anything by this, but if you suspect a woman is afraid of you and she's walking alone at night, don't speak to her. It won't help. And especially don't ask her where she lives repeatedly. I wasn't drunk. I didn't appear to be drunk or need any help. I was just walking home like I usually would. I am, however, inclined to believe that he had bad intentions. I would rather be too cautious than not. So did that creepy dude who seemed to be following me home that night screw off? I'm a 28-year-old male, and 7 nights ago at around 10:30 p.m., my life changed. I was walking home from work in downtown Vancouver, British Columbia, when I was randomly punched and kicked by someone walking past me. Now, I had never seen this person before. I said nothing to this person, and I wasn't in their way. In fact, I made a point of moving out of his way as he was walking fairly close to me. As I walked past him, he swung his hand out, punched me in the forehead, and went in for a punch. Being a fairly big guy with defensive training, I was able to protect myself from the second punch. After working a very long and hard shift, I didn't want to get into a fight, so I tried to flee. That's when I saw some people walking in my way and watching what was going on. I screamed for them to call the police, and that's when he started to kick me in the back. The couple didn't call, so I reached for my phone and pushed the power button about 5 times to activate SOS mode. The operator picked up, and when the assailant heard I was on the phone, he bounced. The police came, took my statements, and in the process, another unit arrested the guy. I've had a pretty bad headache, and I'm all bruised up. But the worst part is the mental anguish that I suffer walking in public, and even more so when I have to walk alone at night. The walk is down a very populated main road, but that doesn't ease the pain and stress. I always make sure to watch every single person now, check over my shoulders every couple of seconds, and practically jog all the way home. I feel like an idiot for even feeling this way. As a male raised in a household of competitive fighters, I was always told to never feel weak, but all I wanted to do when I got home that night was just sit in the shower and break down. Anyways, that's my story. Thank you for taking the time to listen to it and letting me vent. And for anyone else that walks home at night, please be careful.
My name is Matthew, and this is the most horrifying experience I've ever had. This was something straight out of a horror movie. I lived in a rural town in California and worked at a local Domino's. I have to walk past some woods in order to get to my house. I've been working at Domino's since I was 17, and I am now 19. I have also been walking past the woods, and nothing strange has ever happened to me. Until today. So, my shift at Domino's ended at 7:30, a bit later than my normal time I get out. So I'm walking, and I could see the woods maybe a few miles up ahead. Finally, I get to the woods, and I'm on the side of the road. To get a better idea of where I was, Imagine a road and trees on both sides. Now, there are barely any cars or people on the road at this time. Keep in mind that it's getting dark and you only have very little light, so it really added to the creepiness. Anyway, as I was walking, I thought I could hear something coming from the trees. I looked, but I didn't see anything. I continued walking when a rock was thrown at me and landed right in front of me. I then turned around and looked to the trees, and I could see someone waving at me. It was dark, so I couldn't see who it was or how they looked. I asked, hey, do you need something? He responded in a loud whisper and said, "Hey, come over here. I want to show you something." I told him that I had to get home and that I couldn't be late. He responded saying, "Oh, don't worry, it will only take a second. I really need your help with something." I told him I'll help, but I only had a minute. He said a minute is all it will take. I took a deep breath and walked over to him. He said that he found a man-made hole dug in the ground and wanted to see what was down there and that he didn't have a light. I told him I would shine my light with my iPhone down there to take a look. Doing that was the biggest mistake I've ever done. I walked over and stood by the hole with the man behind me. Before I was about to shine the light, the man pushed me down the hole. I fell about 20 feet and landed on something soft. I started cussing and screaming at the man, but I didn't see him. I stood up and I could feel the soft thing I was on. I had to see what I was standing on. I shined the flashlight on my phone and shined it down. I felt like my whole world had been shattered. The light revealed the body. It was a naked woman who looked to be about 20 and she had been killed. She had cuts everywhere on her body. I stayed down there for a good half hour before finally managing to climb out and run home. I didn't tell my parents about what I saw. I only told a few of my closest friends. My name is Courtney and I was 23 years old when this happened. I worked at a McDonald's right near my house. In order to get to my house or to my work, you have to pass by a public park. I always carry pepper spray on me in case anything happens to me. I've been working at McDonald's for a few months now, and whenever I would work, I would always pass by the park and nothing has ever happened. Until this one night. It was a Wednesday, I believe, and I had just gotten off from work. It was around 11 p.m. and I was starting to walk home. The reason why I walked from work to home is because my house is close by, so there's no need to drive. Anyway, while I was walking, I looked behind me for whatever reason, and I saw a man in all black following me. I thought nothing of it and just simply kept walking. I looked behind me once more, and this time, I could tell that he was walking a bit faster. I walked faster too, hoping that this guy would go away. I felt like he could put his hand on me at any moment, so I had my hand on my pepper spray just in case. And then it happened. I felt a hand cover my mouth and another hand grab my neck. I screamed and took out my pepper spray and sprayed the man in the eyes, and he fell to the ground. I ran home while the man lied on the ground screaming in pain. I finally came home and went inside almost out of breath. But unfortunately, it didn't end there. My parents weren't home, and when I went to look out of my bedroom window, I saw the man across the street looking right at me. He then ran off into the darkness, and I never saw him again.